Coming to get you, Barbara.
When there's no more room in hell.
What's going on, everybody? Happy Sunday night to you all. That is a little weird. I just noticed on my screen you can see kind of the outline of my camera there during the intro. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just on my end. I'm not sure. But what's going on, guys? I don't know if I'm hallucinating or what, because I've been putting in a lot of time and research. I felt like a private detective this week. For one, I've been sick, so I've just kind of been just kind of digging into various things, various topics, books and movies and stuff like that, and uh, found myself finishing Stephen King's Pet Sematary this week. I watched the movie again this week for the first time in a while on Blu-ray, and I've just been on like a Pet Sematary kick, and I was like, that would be a really fun, interesting, because I haven't done one of these streams in quite a while, the What If streams. Um, I think I've done a couple in the past, and it's been quite a while. I think I've done What If Night of the Living Dead had kept its original name, Night of the Flesh Eaters, and I think the first one I did. What was the first one I did? What if O.J. Simpson had starred in Dawn of the Dead, which was actually a thing at one point in time. There was talks of O.J. Simpson starring in Dawn of the Dead at one point. So that was a fun stream. That was an interesting stream to talk about. But I felt like one of those private detectives that has like all the shit on the board that's got like the strings connected to this and that. And I've just been playing with the idea of like what would happen, what would have happened if George had directed Pet Sematary in 1988 as he was originally supposed to do. I mean, it was all but, you know, contracted for him to be the director of that film. And then, of course, everybody knows the story. Having to do reshoots for Monkey Shines, he ends up not getting the job. They end up going with Mary Lambert, and the rest is history, as they say. And we're going to dig into the history of Pet Sematary, the history of the book, Stephen King's novel, Pet Sematary, and and really play with the what if scenario, a scenario that, in my mind, would have drastically changed the trajectory of George's career going into the 90s for the better. And in my opinion, after really thinking about it and really kind of connecting the dots, it's one of those situations where this may have been the moment in Romero's career, as it says in the thumbnail. I think it may be George's biggest missed opportunity. Was getting to direct Pet Sematary in the late 80s. So we're going to definitely dig into that, talk about that tonight. Should be a really fun topic. I'm really looking forward to it. Like I said, I've been doing a shitload of research and, brain exercises. And it's like, okay, well, if this happened, then this would have happened. Casting changes, who would George have cast in Pet Sematary? What changes would I have made that I would like to have seen George make? So many possibilities that we can go through tonight, and it's going to be one of those what I like to call mental masturbation shows, where we just spew ideas and what if scenarios, and we'll discuss whether we think that that the film would have been as popular and successful as it was if George had directed it, or maybe more so. So we'll discuss. It's going to be a fun one tonight. So stick around and let's play a little what if tonight, as Creed once put it. What if? What if? But yeah, like I said, it's been a fun week. I don't know, fun week, but it's been a fun week doing all this research and digging into Pet Sematary, and it's a movie that I've always liked, but haven't really dug too deep into. Like I said, just getting over a sickness. You could tell last week I was starting to come down with it. Really hit me hard on Sunday. Really hit me hard on Monday. Like it just traveled from chest to throat to nose, and so I don't know if I still sound a little under the weather. I'm not 100%. I actually wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do a stream because my voice was pretty much gone by the end of the week. I just sounded awful. But I felt up to the task this week. So here I am. Good to see everybody in the chat tonight. I saw Jeff chiming in earlier. I'll just grab a seat in the back. Hope you're going to enjoy your weekend. You too, my man. Grab that seat in the back. Let's talk a little George A. Romero's Pet Sematary. You got Michelle in the house. I know she's worn the hell out. She's been, I think she's been working 13 days straight. Michelle, I think, and not not like 13 days straight of sitting behind a desk and taking calls or whatever. Like she's kind of in the same situation. She's dealing with death and mortality and stuff for 13 days straight. I think I would probably be on the verge of losing my mind as well. But Michelle says, "Hey, Mike, and all here for some at least some of the stream, but it's dependent on patience and sheer exhaustion. Well, hang in there as long as you can, and not just for this stream, but just in life. It sounds like it's been rough. So hang in there, Michelle. Hope you're doing well. Got Matt in the house, Drone of the Dead, of course, was well on the show last weekend for Collecting the Dead episode. A really fun 3-hour episode, looking all through Matt's collection throughout his room. Really cool stuff. Go check out his page at Drone of the Dead. Give him a like and a sub and all that fun shit. And yeah, good to see you, Matt. We'll definitely have you back on here soon. Bonnie's in the house. A brand new profile pic. Your profile pics get more and more morbid as we go on, Bonnie. But what's going on, Bonnie? If this is the same Bonnie, the name is different. I'm only aware of one Bonnie on here. I don't know. Is this a different account? Did you change your account name or? But I'm just going to assume that this is Bonnie. And Bonnie, I felt so bad for you. Your first round in the bracket challenge was damn near flawless, and then that second round hit, and it's been rough. It was all downhill from there. But your first round was really nice. But good to see you, Bonnie, as always. We got John Vulo in the house. What's going on, John? Taking a step away from digging out every music cue that he can come across for every Romero film ever made. Which those are still awesome. I still just go back and I'll just check in every now and just like pick a spot and just because you just released the DeWolf music cues for the Crazies over on his channel. Go check those out. It's amazing how he tracked all these down. Like even just the little additions that you hear throughout the movie. Like John's tracked it down and put it up on YouTube. So go check out John's channel. He's got some really, really cool stuff over there. Speaking of going check these guys out, the Revival House podcast. These guys are on fire right now. Go check them out. Give them a sub. They just did an Exorcist commentary the other night. That was a lot of fun to be in the chat for. And I'll be on these guys' channel again this coming up Friday for another episode of Inside Rue Morgue. What are we calling? What is it called? Friday night at the Rue Morgue or something like that? Friday night at the Morgue. Either way, it's a whole lot of fun. If you guys missed the first episode, go and check it out. Going back, talking about the 10-year anniversary edition of Rue Morgue magazine, the cover story of The Thing. So we went into a real deep dive on The Thing. Really, really cool stuff. But yeah, definitely go check these guys out. One of my favorite channels on YouTube right now, bar none. And love hanging out and chopping it up with those guys. So good to see you guys in the house. Got Robert Harbitz in the house. Hello, Alpha and all. Sounds like a fun topic tonight. I think it should be. Like I said, these are those type of shows that I always feel like overwhelmed and underprepared for when I do them. Like a deep dive show, or like a what if show, or when I go into really like digging into history and stuff. Like I always just feel like kind of like, oh fuck, and I'm pretty scatterbrained, so I have just like a shitload of notes, notebooks. I got my books handy here with different stuff. So we're gonna piece all this shit together, and I got a lot to share with you guys tonight. I have like a PowerPoint presentation. It's like a TED Talk. I was thinking about changing the name of this stream to Dead Talk. I think that's kind of clever, but yeah, this one should be fun. I had a lot of fun putting it together. So we got Synth in the house. Hey there, still out and about. We'll be careful out there, man. Our Synth's out there picking up strangers all over the West Coast right now. That would be a scary fucking job for me. I don't know, man. Like I delivered pizzas for years, and that was scary enough. But actually having just strangers in my car at any time is just kind of like, but you're doing the Lord's work out there. So stay safe, my man. Got Stezio in the house. Howdy, family. Been a long week, but I'm ready to relax and hang. Glad to have you, man. Yeah, it's been a long week for sure, but the weekend was nice. But like I said, we got one last piece of business here on Sunday night to hang out and talk a little Pet Sematary and a little George Romero tonight. So So it should be fun. Good to see you, my man. We got Ed's in the house, who was dropping some pretty cool some shit I didn't know about Pet Cemetery, some Pet Cemetery trivia before we came on live tonight. Shot me a message on Facebook and was hitting me with some trivia. I was like, dude, that's awesome. Like, I'll definitely that is going to get put to use tonight, because there were a couple of things that he told me that I didn't really take into consideration when putting this together. So we'll definitely talk about it. What's going on, my man? Let's see who else we got. We got Steven in the house. Steven Oostrack Jr.'s in the house. Howdy, campers. What's going on, brother? Hope you're doing well. Let's see. We got everybody saying hi to everybody. Hi to everybody. Matt says, what didn't think of Pet Sematary? It's my favorite King novel outside of the Dark Tower series. So what did I think of Pet Sematary? I loved it. I think I thought it was riveting. And then the whole backstory of Stephen King. I mean, up to that point, especially when the movie came out, up to that point, I mean, it was Stephen King's most successful novel at the time, and the whole lore behind it. It was the novel that Stephen King even wasn't sure if he wanted to put out, because it was too much for him. Yeah, I really really enjoyed it. I liked it better than the movie, and I hate to be that guy. I'm like, oh, the book was better. I always used to take the piss out of those people, and they'd be like, oh, you should read the book. It's better. And that's I find that true. I'm stuttering. I find that true in some cases, and true and not so true in other cases. I think, like, for example, a Stephen King one that I finished a couple weeks ago, Carrie. I find the movie better than the book. Like, I think the movie is a way better than the book. So I'm not gonna be that guy where it's just like every book is always better than the movie. But in this case, I do kind of prefer the book, and we'll talk about different reasons why, and why I think George would have been kind of a perfect choice to direct that at that point in his career, and at that point in his life, and what was going on. I think it would have just been a great fit for George. And like I said, I think it would have really drastically changed the trajectory of his career going forward. But yeah, I loved it. Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, OJ, quite the stuff. Yeah, can you imagine OJ as Peter in Dawn of the Dead? I'm so glad that didn't happen. If you guys haven't seen that, go back and check out that stream, the What If stream. What if OJ Simpson had starred in Dawn of the Dead? I'm so glad that didn't happen, because it would have just completely tarnished the legacy of that movie from about 1994 on. I think it'd been one of those things where it was like it'd be like a morbid curiosity for people. It's like, oh, OJ was in a zombie movie back in the 70s. Go check it out. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, that's weird. Yeah, thank God that didn't happen. Rebel House said, Pet Cemetery 1 and 2 are some of my favorites. Mary Lambert was a great director for Pet Cemetery 1 and 2. Looking forward to you trying to change my mind. Well, I'm not going to change your mind. I'm first and foremost, my point is not to take away anything that Mary Lambert did, because I think she did a fantastic job. And basically, what her job on Pet Cemetery was, for the most part, outside of some casting choices and stuff like that, she did. And it's something that's really hard to do, and not a lot of people are all that successful doing it, honestly, is translating King's story to the screen. And Stephen King, of course, wrote the screenplay for Pet Cemetery, and I think she does a fantastic job at accomplishing that goal. So I'm definitely not here to shit on the movie at all, or shit on Mary Lambert's contributions to it. But I do think there are certain elements to the movie, especially after reading the book, that I think George could have played into a little more, was maybe a little more suited for, and maybe could have brought a little more to the table. But as far as Pet Cemetery 2 goes, we'll talk about it. I know you guys are big Pet Cemetery 2 guys. But we'll definitely touch on that, because that's one that I couldn't see George coming back to do the sequel. So she can have Pet Cemetery 2, but we'll definitely touch on it. Yeah, I feel like we do, Matt. Yeah, I feel like we need to do a book club for real. It needs to be a new series of just start doing a series of streams on here. Literally, the Susanna Sparrow book club. We need to build, because yeah, I'm just one thing, like, starting to pick up books more and read more and kind of get into stuff, is like I'm finding different avenues to explore different books. Some, like I'm at work. A lot of times I'll just pick up the audiobook and listen to it. There's a lot of shit available on YouTube or Spotify. I have certain books up here that I read specifically when I'm up here. I have certain books that I read downstairs when I'm downstairs. It's just like whenever I have a spare moment, I just pick it up. And I find myself preferring to do that more so than what I used to do, which would just be kind of just sitting around doom scrolling on YouTube. And then 2 hours of my life is gone. And I'm just like, I don't even know what the hell I can't remember one thing I just watched. Um, so yeah, I'm totally down for that. I think that's kind of a fun idea, actually. Um, yeah, man, bring it on. Yeah, let's do it, man. Susanna Sparrow Book Club. Let's do it. John's in the house. John Wakefield. What's going on, man? It would have been interesting if George did it, but I like how the film turned out, so I'm not disappointed. Yeah, man. And I actually just watched there. John's got a video on his channel of his review and thoughts on Pet Sematary. I actually just watched that earlier. Actually, good stuff, man. Um, yeah, that's kind of how like. I'm not disappointed how the film turned out because I think it's one of Stephen King's best adaptations in terms of book to film that I've seen. I mean, it was hugely successful, a highly successful film. Made a shit ton of money. So there's not a whole lot to nitpick about it. But in this universe, here on the Alfa Romero channel, what if George had directed this movie? Would it have been better, worse? What would it have meant for George's career? What would it have meant for Mary Lambert's career? Because Mary Lambert, up to that point, was just a music video director for the most part. Like she had done some film work, but nothing really of note. She was mostly known as like a high profile music video director. She had done a lot for MTV throughout the 80s. Um, so she was an interesting choice for sure to do this. And like I said, I think she did a great job. So I can't complain. Brandon, what's going on, man? Brandon Salisbury's in the house. Yeah, man, it's been a while. Hope you've been doing well, man. And Brandon is actually, let me rephrase that. It's not just Brandon Salisbury. That's just disrespectful. Fangoria Chainsaw Award-winning director Brandon Salisbury is in the house, ladies and gentlemen, and he's just been nominated again for a Rondo Award, which I think is you're available to actually vote on. I'm not super familiar with the Rondo Award, so I don't. I guess there's probably is there a website or something? I need to get on that. Is it still available to vote on? Because I need to do that. Um, but yeah, man, I hope you win that as well, man. Fucking sweep them, sweep those motherfuckers. But yeah, man, hope you're doing well. Since yeah, he's possibly going to do The Stand, another big missed opportunity for George. Yeah, that was definitely that was definitely early on, early '80s, right around when it was kind of around the same time that George was in talks to do The Stand. Didn't come through, but it it does seem like that would have been a perfect fit for George's style, for sure. But I think something like The Stand you'd kind of have to do for television, and that's just something George wasn't interested in doing at the time. George was, which is kind of one of the main reasons why he and Rubenstein split. And George ended up leaving Laurel was because Rubenstein wanted to do more television, wanted to focus more on television. The Tales from the Dark Side series, Monsters. He was, more interested in developing more stuff for television as opposed to feature films. And George kind of just wanted to focus on being a director for feature films. So I don't, if it had to be for TV, I don't think George would have done it, either way. Do I consider Pet Sematary a zombie movie? I personally don't. It definitely plays into the idea of the dead coming back to life and killing people, which is one thing that would kind of play into the hands of a filmmaker like George Romero. It's like, oh, it's the guy that made Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Of course, he should do, the Stephen King book where people come back from the dead and kill other people. But do I consider it like as a zombie movie purist, I guess I wouldn't consider Pet Sematary a zombie film, but I could see how you could, for sure. We got William Blasco's in the house. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, William. Hope you're doing well, my man. Oh shit, I lost my place. There we go. Stezio saying yes, Pet Sematary is a zombie movie. So yeah, I mean, I can see the argument either way. I'm not gonna argue it one way or the other. Steven says, could you imagine the fun if OJ was in Dawn and they kept the could you chop? Oh man, Steven, you're coming in early tonight, man. We're not even 30 minutes into the stream, and you already knocked it out of the park with this one. Could you imagine if they would have kept the "Could you chop her head off" line? The only thing that would have been better if they changed Fran's name to Nicole. I've never thought of that. I can honestly say I've never considered that as a possibility, but yeah, that line would have been replayed all over the world. You'd be seeing that shit on like TikTok now of OJ Simpson sitting there saying, "Could you chop a head off?" Wow. Yeah, I've never put that together. Holy shit. Um, since then, hey Brandon, your movie's free on YouTube now. More exposure. Yeah, I mean the Resident Evil, George Romero's Resident Evil. For those of you that have not checked that out yet, check it out. It's one of the legitimately, as not just a fan of Romero and a fan of Resident Evil, like it's legitimately one of the best documentaries I've seen in quite some time. I've watched it a handful of times now already. So yeah, high recommendation. Check it out. Matt's saying Rob House used to live in the town where Pet Cemetery 2 was filmed. That's right. Yeah, go check out. Matt's actually got some location footage over on his channel from some filming locations from Pet Cemetery 2. Pretty cool stuff. Same town where most of The Walking Dead was filmed. Got some footage of the locations on his channel. Yeah, go check it out. Check it out. Brent says George is probably the director with the biggest missed opportunity. Salem's Lot, The Stand, It, Resident Evil, Goosebumps, The Mummy, many more. Yeah. I mean, definitely, there were a lot of missed opportunities in George's career, but I think at this point in time, just my opinion, after kind of looking into it and kind of connecting the dots, I feel like this was the turning point in George's career. If he would have done, because I mean, it was there. Like it was signed. I mean, this was in the works, planned. Like this was gonna happen. George was gonna direct Pet Cemetery, and the fact that it didn't happen, I think, really, just derailed George's career, especially going into the '90s and what we know became of the '90s for George. If he had directed it, I think we'd be talking about a completely different career at this point, for good or worse. I don't know, but I think it would have definitely changed things for George. Um, John saying I'd be much more interested in George Romero's Resident Evil. I read the script and it was great. Yeah, that's kind of up there for me too. But who's to say? And this is my theory, that if George had directed Pet Cemetery, we wouldn't have gotten George's connection to Resident Evil. I don't think we wouldn't even have gotten the commercial that he did for Biohazard 2. So, like I said, if I think me personally, I think if he would have done Pet Cemetery, he he wouldn't have been connected at all to the Resident Evil. If things had played out, we're kind of playing the game where it's like the butterfly effect. Like if this happens, then does this actually happen? But just my 2 cents. Roadhouse, hell yes, I'll give it a watch. Matt, I would say our obsession with Pet Cemetery 2 is what made me become friends with Aaron. There you go. Yeah. Did you guys watch fucking Pet Cemetery 2 like once every year? It's like a yearly watch along that you guys do over on your channel. God bless you. Yeah, that's right, Brandon. You were on the Revival House show quite a few months back. It's been a little while. I remember watching that. It was a really, really good episode. Um, Robert's saying, love the Blu-ray of your doc. Absolutely. It's a good one. It's kind of like I just went down the list of all the bonus features and all the interviews that were on the bonus features, and it was just like, oh, Norman England, Mike Felsher, Matt Blasey. Let me see if I can get all those guys on the channel. It's like I want to find out more from those guys. Another guy, Brandon. I don't know if he'd be willing to do it, but I'd love to get you and Tom on. Tom Robinolt, is that how you pronounce his last name? I was watching his interview, like definitely piqued my curiosity. I'd like to learn more about his background and find out more about him. So I don't know if you'd be interested in doing something like that, but I'd love to get you both on at some point and talk about the doc and what you guys are working on now, because I know you guys are working on some new stuff too. So, but just throwing the idea out there. Okay, good. Same Bonnie, different moniker. Okay, good. Glad to see it. Bonnie has changed gimmicks, guys. It's a new gimmick. It's a new Bonnie, new day. she's turned heel ever since her her, her bracket challenge collapse. She's turned heel. John says, fun fact, Pet Sematary was inspired by a real incident when King's son almost got hit by a car. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what kind of inspired him. He was like, this is the thing that, terrifies me the most. Like, well, why not put it in a book and see if it terrifies anybody else? And sure shit did. John says, when I was a kid, before I saw the film, I thought it was about a killer cat. It was kind of promoted like that. There's a lot of church visuals all over the posters and stuff, which would kind of almost be like almost a running theme throughout Stephen King's novels. I mean, what's the you got the Cat's Eye? What was the other one that's prominently features a cat? I can't remember what it's called, but it does seem like Stephen King has a thing for cats. Since says off the record, I am armed in case I get dangerous passengers. No issue so far. Okay, good. All right. Dead Talk. Yeah, you'd probably get a bunch of really weird viewers then, even weirder than us. Yeah, like TED Talk. Instead of a TED, is that even still a thing anymore? Am I dating myself at this point? TED Talk, Dead Talk. Since says Dale Midkiff is a pretty crappy actor, though. Yeah, well, I'm definitely planning on touching on that here in a little bit. So definitely going to touch on that. And I think I have the perfect guy that would fill that role a little better, in my opinion. But we'll get to it. Let me roll through these comments. Then I did want to update everybody on the bracket challenge, where we're down to the final four, voting will commence in the semifinals for tomorrow, and I'll give. I got the current point standings as we speak, and right now it's looking like it might be a runaway for one fella in particular. But yeah, I'm definitely wanting to talk about that. Michelle says I absolutely love the novel and the Mary Lambert film. The remake, not so much. Yeah, don't ask me. Don't bring up the remake or any of that or the prequel or whatever that just came out a year or so ago. I have not seen either one. I don't plan on it. So that's not going to be a point of discussion tonight at all. Sticking to the OG and maybe a little bit of two. So John says the book is better, but both are terrific. I agree with that. Oh, Rick, the North Going Llama. What's going on, brother? Good to see you. Yeah. Everybody seems to be in agreement that the remake sucks. I've never heard anything good about it, so I didn't really go out of my way to do it. Matt says King does an amazing job of articulating Lewis Creed's grief, breaking him to the point of giving in to the burial ground, much sadder and desperate in the book. I agree, fully agree with that. I think that's the thing that I kind of like about the book a little more. I mean, and that's the thing about a book. I mean, you can go into more detail, and it's really told from the perspective of Lewis Creed throughout the entire book. So you're in his head a little more. It's a little easier to convey as opposed to the movie. But so yeah, I agree with that for sure. Steven says he was actually good in a TV series called Time Tracks. If you ever have a chance to check it out, never heard of Time Tracks. It's interesting. Yeah, there you go. You got it, Synth. Dead Talk. There you go. Thank you for coming to my Dead Talk tonight. See? It says, weird thought just hit me. George would have been the only director to look Fred Gwynn eye to eye. That's true. But it's hard to imagine anybody else playing that role, but would George have cast Fred Gwynn if he had directed the movie? Or did George have much of a say in the casting? I mean, as a director, I mean, we'll definitely talk about that tonight too, because that is a point of emphasis. Yeah, okay. Synth wasn't too impressed with Time Track, Steven. Sorry. Rick says mine would be outside of Pet Sematary. Would be Doctor Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. And in terms of like movies that George could have directed that you would have been interested in. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of Doctor Sleep when I watched it. But again, you're trying to do a sequel to The Shining. It's like God bless him, Mike Flanagan, for what he's able to do. It wasn't the biggest piece of shit in the world, which is the biggest accomplishment. Like to me, like that's the biggest accomplishment you could hope for in trying to do a sequel to The Shining. because it does. I mean, it does play into the movie, the movie version of The Shining. It's trying to play into a sequel of the movie version of The Shining as opposed to the book. And to me, it's like, okay, yeah, like a sequel to The Shining to me would be like somebody trying to do a sequel to Gone with the Wind or something. It's like it's just not. I just don't think it's gonna work. Uh, Todd, what's going on, brother? Todd, Riverman Revival says, Pet Cemetery was one of the only films to scare me as a kid. Yeah, I mean it's one a lot of people consider like his like one of the most like the scariest movie ever made. Uh, I've heard that from a number of people, and I mean, yeah, it's definitely. I'm like I said, I watched it again earlier this week, and it's still definitely effective. Like it makes me so goddamn uncomfortable when the little boy runs out on that road, especially now as a father and somebody who worries about that exact situation all the time. It's like, oh, you know, I remember like even like I know it's coming and the scene is happening. I didn't even want to like I had like the book part like it plays out differently in the book, kind of the way that the story's told. Um, and even that, there were moments where I just had to like just step away for a second because I was just like, I don't even want to think about the horror of a situation like that happening. It's just I don't know what I would do because then your brain starts going down that avenue of like, oh, if that happened to me, how would I feel? What would I do? And I always just go to like, oh, if that happened to me, like fuck it, everybody's going out with me. I would lose my fucking mind for sure. Um, um, let's see, Steven Steven trying to defend Time Tracks a little bit here. I've never seen it, so I can't speak on it. But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Del Mitkiff in Pet Cemetery. There were just moments, and like I said, I'll talk about it a little. I think somebody that could have played this a little better. But there are just moments in the movie where there's just like this blank look on his face that's supposed to convey some sort of intensity or something. But to me, he just looks dull. He just looks a little dopey. Where he's just like, it's just that, and I just, yeah, it just wasn't. Yeah, just didn't really quite work for me. Um, yeah, for sure, man. Everybody go check out John's channel. Give him a sub. He's got some good shit on there. Rick says, "I hear you, Alpha. Sometimes we need to unplug from the internet, and reading a few good books helps with that." Yeah, for sure, man. Definitely does. I've been rolling through recently. I've been rolling through Salem's Lot is another Stephen King one that I'm reading. I finished the Phantasm book, the Phantasm exhumed book. Rolled through that in like a fucking week. That was just like one that I just couldn't put down. It was just like it's such an easy read and so well done, so interesting. But I did just start on this one, the George Romero work of George Romero, Raising the Dead from Adam Hart. This one's really good so far. I'm about yeah, this does feel just like a book club at this point, I guess. But where did I leave off? I'm a few chapters in. I just started it earlier this week, and it's a lot to take in, a lot to chew on. Definitely digging it so far. A lot more so than Night of the Living Dead that Tony Williams did. I haven't found any just egregious, you know, miscastings or anything in this so far. So far so good. Shell says I read the book about 14 to or I read the book at about 15 or 14 to 15 and I couldn't read it at night because it was too scary. The movie scared the bejesus out of me the first time I saw it too. Yeah, I mean it's effective. Um that's for sure. Robert says I have a little over 200 books on Audible and Pet Sematary is one of my favorites. Um the one yeah, there's quite a few things on YouTube that I've been just coming across. I just started and I gotta say, like, I know when we talk about John Russo, some people are like, oh well, John Russo's a better writer than filmmaker. And the audiobook for Return of the Living Dead is on YouTube. I started that this week too while I was at work. I'm not so sure that's true. That's kind of a rough like you finding out what that book's about. You're kind of glad that Dan O'Bannon kind of took it in a different direction for the film. Um, but that's my only exposure to Russo's writing, so I can't say for sure. But at this point, I'm not super impressed with his Return of the Living Dead, his take on that at least. Um, Michelle says that Elliot Goldenthal score is beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It's one of my all-time favorites. I tend to agree with that. I think it's pretty good for what it is. I don't think I would change anything about it. But I do have an idea. Like if George had directed Pet Sematary, I do think that there may be a different option for that, because something that would follow later on in George's career in this world wouldn't have happened if he had done Pet Sematary. So keep that in mind. Since his Rondo was lightly carbonated soda in the 80s. Different Rondo. Different Rondo scent. It's not a soda award. So you can slam it down fast. You should drink it a lot. I don't remember those. I don't think we had those growing up. Rick says, was not the first Pet Sematary the one with Denise Crosby's mom? That's right. Yeah, Denise Crosby. Denise Crosby, which Ed dropped some cool information about her coming onto the on the stream tonight. We'll definitely talk about when we get into some of the casting choices that George may have made. Brent says, yeah, you can vote until May 1st. There you go. There's a website. You have to email the rep your choices. That you can email them just for one category. So just, okay, cool. Let's all do that. Just send them an email and say, George A. Romero's Resident Evil for Best Documentary. The rest, throw a dart, do whatever you want with them. Very cool. So I guess you can go to Google and just type Rondo Awards voting. I'm sure something would pop up. Yeah, everybody get on that. We gotta help our boy out here. Add to his trophy case, which I got to hold. I got to see that Fangoria Chainsaw Award that Brandon won, and it's pretty fucking cool. I felt pretty special. I felt like somebody holding that thing. That's what she said. Steven says, yeah, it's a website. I voted for Svengoolie for the Rondo. Good luck, Brandon. So you didn't even vote for fucking Brandon? Come on, Steve. Hello, Svengoolie, you know. You can't argue with Svengoolie. Paul, what's going on, brother? Paul Brooks TV is in the house. Happy Sunday evening. Alpha and everyone. I don't want to be buried in a pet cemetery. I'd prefer the Evans City Cemetery. Yeah, that song's been stuck in my fucking head all day, all week. I don't want to be buried in a pet cemetery. Gotta love the Ramones. I mean, for a punk band, I mean, they were pretty silly. They had a real sense of humor about them. But I think that's the thing that kind of endeared people to them. But yeah, that song is, I've been humming that song nonstop for sure. Brand says, I felt bad missing so many of your shows. Don't worry, man. No worries. Life's been busy, conventions, multiple film projects in development. Dude, the work must be done. Like, you gotta get shit done, man. You gotta sit around watching my ass bullshit for a couple hours every weekend. Work must be done. I get it. I was just mentioning Variety art. Oh, that's awesome. Coming here is like home. Well, welcome home, man. Welcome home. But yeah, man, work must be done. Get it done. Get after it, my man. And John says the music for the film is terrific. It reminds me of the Amityville score. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it, but there may be like another composer that I think might have done something kind of interesting with it, who was just coming off of another classic horror film at the time that George would go on to work with later. There's a hint. Rick says, I think Pet Sematary is more supernatural than a traditional zombie hordes attacking the living. That's kind of my feeling. It's a little more supernatural of a movie, more so than just what I consider a zombie film, I guess. Pet Sematary was not as apocalyptic as like Dawn of the Dead or even Night of the Living Dead. Yeah, but it's definitely, you know, dark. It's definitely a dark film. It definitely takes the idea of the dead coming back to life, which I think at that time in the late 80s, this is maybe one of the only ways that you could have done a zombie movie and it had been as successful as Pet Sematary was. Because I think by that point, I think the zombie genre had kind of burned itself out a little bit. I think after Thriller and Return of the Living Dead, I think zombies weren't so scary anymore, which Tom even talks about in terms of when he was making, you know, Night 90. He was trying to figure out a way to make zombies scary again. And because by that point they were just, you know, pop culture. Even that trailer for Day of the Dead with the zombie in the theater eating the popcorn, it doesn't fit at all what Day of the Dead is, but it's such an iconic trailer that everybody, you know, if you know Day of the Dead, if you know George Romero, you know that trailer. But even then, like the advertising for it was still kind of tongue in cheek, like oh So yeah, by that point, zombies really weren't that scary. But something like Pet Cemetery, which I wouldn't even say like the zombie aspect of it is as scary as fucking Zelda. Like the Zelda shit, like to me is still to this day like so super uncomfortable to watch. Um, Especially when that little bitch runs up to the camera. It's like, hey, the little thing. Fuck that, as Mark Borchardt would say. Fuck that. Um, yeah, man. Everybody get on it. Clean sweep. Let's keep George winning awards even after death, man. That's what it's all about. Rob said if OJ was in Dawn of the Dead, it would have destroyed its legacy, and there would be no Living Dead weekend at the mall ever. That's probably true. You're probably not far off from that at all. We talked about that in that stream. Uh, yeah, I think that because it would just be one of those like dirty secret movies. It'd be like the thing that you'd watch to be like, oh, did you know OJ was in this weird, low budget zombie film in the 70s, and people are like, oh, really? And then you'd get to the scene where he's talking about chopping people's heads off, and you're just kind of like, ooh, that's a little rough taste now. Yeah, it wouldn't have been good for sure. I'm gonna try to jump around a little bit on these comments, guys. Like I said, I did want to touch on the brackets, let you guys know everybody how everything's going and how everybody's doing. We're down to the final four, the four non-Romero zombie films that'll be coming down to the wire, fighting for king of the non-Romero zombie film. And the four good ones, one I did not see coming and really fucked my bracket up. So I'm pretty much out of the running. But I really underestimated Dead Alive. I had no idea it was as popular as it was. But yeah, apparently it's pretty fucking popular. But yeah, let me put a pin in these comments here real quick. Let me see if there's anything topical. Real quick before I jump on that, as we're already 45 minutes in. We haven't even gotten into the history of Pet Cemetery and everything here. But, yeah, man. Yeah, check. Let me know. I'd love to find out more about him because I found his interview really interesting. It was just kind of like, oh, who's this guy? I want to find out more about this dude. So yeah, man. Just throw it out there to him, see what he says. If he said something he'd be interested in, I'd be down to have you guys on for sure. Sleepwalkers, that's the one I was thinking of. Had a lot of cats. Yeah, Sleepwalkers was the one I was thinking of. OJ could have seriously fucked Terminator. Yeah, he was supposed to be the fucking Terminator in Terminator 2, like he did Naked Gun. It was in a constant cable rotation before his arrest and disappeared for decades. Thank God he missed those roles. Yeah, seriously. Can you imagine fucking Terminator? Gone with the Wind 2, he gives a damn. Yeah, real change there. Michelle loves Del Midkiff and Pets. Okay, all right. Aaron, what's going on, brother? Pop it in and say hi. Pet Cemetery was my favorite King book back in the day. Yeah, it's good. It's a good one. It's definitely of the ones that I've read so far, it's definitely the one that fucking struck a chord with me the most. Steven says, I'll give you the horror of the situation, but the little shoe rolling down the highway made me laugh my Steven. I want to believe it's because of how cheap the effect looked, but maybe I'm just slightly you're just slightly insane, Steven. That's all. I wouldn't even say slightly insane. I think you're you're out there, my brother. But we love you. And I say that in jest. If you can laugh at that shoe going down the fucking highway, come on, man. What's wrong with you? Pay the Piper, I have not, but I did see that Daniel Kraus has that new book out, Night of the Living Dead, how it changed the world and changed my life or something like that. I do want to pick that up. I went to Barnes & Noble looking for that last weekend, and they didn't have it. So it's one I'm definitely planning on picking up and checking out at some point for sure, but I have not read Pay the Piper yet. The unfinished manuscript, like The Living Dead, the novel that Daniel finished, like no offense to him or anything, I would feel this way no matter who kind of tried to pick up the mantle for that. but it's just there's something about it. Like I've tried reading that book a couple of times, and there's just something about it that's just like I find myself just trying to figure out like, oh, is this something George would have had in it? Or is this added, or is this like who's telling the story here type of thing. A really good George story. If you guys are into reading, there was a book that came out in the early '80s, Masters of Horror, and it had short stories in there from Stephen King and quite a few other guys. And Romero has a short story in that book called Clay. And I read it a couple times in the past, and I just reread it not too long ago, and it is one of the most just like fucked up. Like you wouldn't expect George to kind of write a story like that. Like how is that in George's head? But yeah, it's a pretty fucked up story. Like by the end of it, you feel kind of dirty. You're just kind of like, ugh, that took a turn I wasn't expecting. But yeah, check that out if you guys ever come across it. I think you can find those books for fairly cheap. Um, but yeah, it's called Clay. It's out there for sure. Um, got Fat Pig the Conqueror's in the house. What's going on, man? Remember Russo's skin mag called Scream Queens Illustrated? Oh yeah, oh yeah. And if you haven't checked out Santa Claus, that's basically what that movie is. It's just a 90-minute advertisement for Scream Queens Illustrated. I'll say that. What's going on, man? Let me see if I missed anybody here in the chat. I'm just going to say what's up real quick. Yeah, Dave Mustaine wrote that song, by the way. I don't know if you guys knew that, but oh, really? Did the composer did the score for Alien 3? I didn't know that. Not a big Alien 3 guy. I'll say that. I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a popular opinion now or unpopular opinion. I don't know, but yeah, I've never been big on Alien 3. Romero did a good film adaptation of the King book, Dark Half. Yeah, I think it's a fairly good one. I don't know if Stephen King was as big of a fan of it as George was kind of hoping, but it was also another one of those where Stephen didn't write the screenplay for it. It was adapted by George and filmed by George. And I always kind of get the vibe that if Steven doesn't write the screenplay for it, he's not super high. It's not what he would have done, so he's not the biggest fan of it. I mean, just look at his thoughts and feelings on The Shining. But yeah, I figured you might not be a big fan of that movie. It's not one of my favorite Romero films either, but I have come around on it for sure over the years. Yeah, you're in the right place, my man. Romero's your favorite horror director. You are in the right place, sir. Michelle loves George's Dark Half adaptation. Yeah, it's great. And Gornick did great work on the Dark Half, didn't he, Michelle? Great stuff on that. Michelle Parsons, Dead Alive. Yeah, all right, let's talk about it. Because like I said, I highly underestimated the popularity of fucking Dead Alive, and it completely screwed my bracket. And I think I overestimated the popularity of the Dawn remake as well. So let's bring it up. Let's bring up the bracket. Let's go through this real quick. We'll see how everything's turned out so far and see what our final four is looking like that we can start voting on starting tomorrow. There'll be two that's starting tomorrow. One matchup tomorrow, one matchup on Tuesday. And then April 1st, April Fool's Day, we will have the finals and we will determine the winner of the best non-Romero zombie film. What are you telling me here? Something popped up on the screen here. I don't know what that means, but I'm just going to ignore it and hope everything works itself out in the end, which is kind of my... There we go. Let's see if we get that popped up there. There we go. So that is what the bracket is looking like as of right now. And I've been kind of surprised. There hasn't really been a whole lot of real close. Like people have been pretty one-sided one way or the other. The closest ones that we've really had so far. So starting there at the top, I mean, Shaun of the Dead obliterates Hell of the Living Dead, 84-16. Kind of saw that one coming. Cemetery Man and Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. That one to me could have gone either way. I'm surprised that one wasn't a little closer, but Cemetery Man comes away with the big victory there. And then this one was the one that surprised me, the Dawn 04 losing to City of the Living Dead. And it's not like I would personally choose the Dawn remake over City of the Living Dead. I love Fulci. I much prefer City of the Living Dead to the Dawn remake, but I was just kind of had the vibe that most people probably wouldn't feel that way. But yeah, Fulci lives. Fulci survived to the second round. Beat Zack Snyder, thank God. But this one was a shock to me. I was for some reason under the impression that Burial Ground was way more popular than I guess it is, because Dead Alive just destroyed it, 83% to 17% in the fan vote. And yeah, I didn't see that one coming. And then you can even see in the second round there, Dead Alive ended up beating out City of the Living Dead. That one was pretty close, 60% to 40%. So that was almost a 50-50 split right there. But Dead Alive has made it to the final four. It will take on Shaun of the Dead, who ended up beating Cemetery Man 76 to 24%. That's going to be an interesting one. To me, I mean, Dead Alive is for sure kind of a dark horse here, because apparently greatly underestimated its popularity. But man, Shaun of the Dead, I just rewatched Shaun of the Dead again for the first time in a little while. Like, it's one that I'll revisit maybe once every year or so. But watched it again the other night just because it's available on YouTube for free right now. And that is, to me, is just like a perfect fucking movie. Like, out of all these movies, it might be. I mean, it's a solid one seed in this tournament. It's just so good, so well written. It literally has everything you'd want in a movie. You know, it has its emotional parts. It's, genuine comedy. It's got its horror aspects, gore, action. I mean, it's literally everything you'd want in a movie. And it's literally, if you're a Romero fan, it's like one of the best contemporary filmmakers out there making a love letter to the films of your favorite director. And it's just like, okay, how can I not love, this fucking movie? So yeah, Shaun of the Dead versus Dead Alive is one of your semifinal matchups. And then over in the other bracket, we got 28 Days Later beating out Nightmare City. We had Return of the Living Dead beating out Zombie, which I thought that one might have been a little closer than it was, but Return of the Living Dead's kind of a powerhouse. I don't know. I don't know if that one's going to lose. Um, then we had Night 90 beating out Reanimator, 64% to 36%. I thought that one might be a little closer, but that's still not too far off. And then Train to Busan just beating the ever living hell out of Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. I think that one's Train to Busan's a great movie. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like there's Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things is just one of those films that not a lot of people have seen. It's one of those films that's a little underseen for people, I think. So wasn't shocked by that result, but thought it might have been a little closer than it was. But yeah, 88% to 12%. That's pretty one sided. And then we had Return beating 28 Days Later, 73 to 27%. And Night 90 beating out Train to Busan, 73 to 27. So we got Return to Living Dead versus Night of the Living Dead, 1990 in one half of the bracket, and the other half Shaun of the Dead versus Dead Alive. So you guys will be able to vote on those two contests coming up over the next couple of days, and then we'll crown the winner on April 1st, April Fool's Day. So who will come out on top? Return of the Living Dead, John Russo, Tom Savini versus Edgar Wright or Peter Jackson. What do you think? I'm just crediting Return of the Living Dead to John Russo just as a gag at this point. If it wins, I'm just going to say, Russo's revenge. There it is. So yeah, that's what the bracket looks like as we speak. So, and then in terms of the contest itself, the current top five right now, for the bracket challenge is Grande's Graveyard is in first place, a commanding lead in first place with 55 total points. Todd from the Revival House in second place with 45 points. Grant, Stukas Dive, third place with 41 points. Then we got a four-way tie at 39 points between myself, Paul Brooks, Michelle, and Larry. And doing the math and looking at everybody's bracket and kind of figuring out the possible ways of who could win what, it's going to be kind of difficult for anybody to knock off Grande in this thing, because so far I think he's missed one in this bracket. Other than that, he's had a pretty perfect bracket to this point. So yeah, it's going to be a hard one to he's going to be a hard one to topple, that's for sure. But yeah, so So yeah, voting commences tomorrow. We're down to the final four. We're down to the line, folks. We're down to the line. Yeah, I must missed out on. I don't know. It's one of those movies I don't go back to a whole lot. Dead Alive is one of the best horror movies ever made. Apparently, I've I've missed something with that. It's just one I just haven't seen a whole lot, to be honest with you. Um, so we'll see. We'll see how it does. Shaun the Dead. It's a tall task. It's a tall task. Um, it's big shout out, special shout out by the way. I'm drinking out of this new glass, but Matt Landrum, Drone of the Dead, hooked me up with one of these new Iron City beer glasses that they just released. I don't know how well you guys can see that or not. It's kind of hard to see there. But it's the new draft glasses since the NFL draft's going to be in Pittsburgh this year. So I don't have any Iron City to drink out of it, but I'm going to drink a Guinness out of it tonight in your honor, Matt. So shout out to Matt. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Super cool of you. But until I have some Iron City to put into it, we're just going to have to settle for a little Guinness. And I'm going to pour it correctly. I don't care what, what 20-year-old bartender has to say about it, but there's a story behind that, but I'll tell it one day. Aaron says Louis Creed has the best slow motion no scream and scream to the sky in film history. Yeah, it's a pretty good one. It's a pretty good one, I'd say. Steven says I had just had another crazy thought and possible future alpha show topic. Okay, could George Romero have directed a comic book superhero movie? If he did, would he go iconic like Superman or Batman or obscure? Well, actually, there he was. They were in talks. I mean, they were in pretty deep talks about it in the 80s. They were going to do an adaptation for a Marvel comic called Copperhead, I think. I forget what the name of the movie was. It had a longer title than the movie, the actual movie title. But it was a Marvel property that they were working on with Laurel, and George was going to direct and all that. And it got to a certain point, and I mean, it's the 80s, and Marvel in the 80s, like, who's going to watch this? This isn't sellable. So funny enough, like George almost, had a little Marvel experience at one point. But yeah, I don't think that would have suited George. Those movies, there's such big budgets and stuff behind those movies, and so much studio interference in those movies. I think George would have just been miserable. Like George hated working on Land of the Dead, and he only had 15 million on that, and having to answer to Universal and all that. Like George was just wasn't him. He's an indie filmmaker at heart, man. And he's always said, like, just give me 5 million and let me go tell my story. I got a little foam on the stash there. But if he had, 20, 25, 30 million bucks, he wouldn't know what to do with it. He would just be like, I have way too much money. I don't know what to do with this. But I think me personally, I think he could have figured it out. But interesting question though. Yeah, 90, man. It's making a comeback in pop culture popularity for sure. Since I love Return, but if I hadn't forgotten to end with Brack, I would have picked Sean at the top. Only one person's picked Sean to win the whole thing, and it was Bonnie. So Bonnie's still, Bonnie's still. I have all the scores down here. That was the top 5. Yeah, Bonnie was hot in the first round, but yeah, she hasn't. I don't think she's won. She's had a correct one in the second round, and she completely screwed up her bracket. R.I.P. to Bonnie's bracket. I know I'm tied for 4, but I'm just looking at the way that my brackets worked out. Like I don't see a way that I'm catching up to Grande either. So, Dark Half's one of Timothy Hutton's weaker performances. I haven't seen a whole lot of Timothy Hutton stuff, but yeah, it's definitely not one of my favorite Romero film performances. That's for sure. Yeah, talking about Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck killed Marvel movies for 10 years, and I love Howard the Duck. I didn't know that was a Marvel movie. Yeah, that's. I don't know if I could see George doing a superhero movie either, but it'd have been interesting, especially something like, from what I've read about that Copperhead property, it would have been something a little outside the box. It wouldn't be your typical family friendly, superhero movie, that's for sure. So that would have been kind of interesting if something would have come of that. Um, but yeah. So let's talk about Pet Cemetery. And what if, let's go into this different world, this different realm. What if George Romero had directed Pet Cemetery as he was originally supposed to do? Um, I guess we can start. I'll go ahead and pull up my little PowerPoint presentation here. We'll start a little um, visual helpers here. There we go. So this all really began when George and Stephen King were put together by a studio, by Warner Brothers, um, right after Martin had come out, right around Martin, Dawn of the Dead. They had optioned the rights for Stephen King's novel Salem's Lot, which had come out a couple of years prior. And as George put it, of course, a major studio sees, vampire in a small town, vampire in a small town. Let's put these guys together and let's see if, we can get this Romero guy to do this Salem's Lot, which Salem's Lot, of course, ended up going on to become a made for television movie directed by Toby Hooper. But at the time, it was they were wanting to do just a regular feature film, and Romero was super interested in that. So, of course, studio puts Romero and King together to talk about the possibilities of doing Salem's Lot as a feature film. That didn't work out. Eventually, they ended up working together and, of course, creating, still to this day, in my opinion, probably the best horror anthology of all time, Creepshow. And from that point on, of course, Creepshow opens #1, doesn't make a killing at the box office, and there's been different opinions and thoughts of why that happened, of why a movie opens #1 and then it seems like Warner Brothers just kind of pulled all the advertising and stuff for the film almost immediately, so it didn't have the chance to really have the long run that it should have. So from that point on, I mean, George and Steve were stayed friends. Of course, Steve has the cameo in Knight Riders. They stay friends. They continue trying to develop other things. The Stand we talked about earlier was one. Of course, Steve ended up writing Christine around this time. Which, fun fact for everybody, Christine, the name of the car was inspired by George's wife at the time, Christine Romero, because Steve liked Christine and loved that name. So yeah, they stayed in contact. I mean, Steve was a regular contributor and collaborator with Laurel Entertainment at the time, which was Romero and Rubenstein's company. And so right around this time, 1983 is when the novel of Pet Sematary was written. Stephen King would write Pet Sematary and release it in 1983. And the hype around this book, now when this book came out, I mean, it was Stephen King's most successful book to date. Even by the time the movie was coming out, it was still like his most popular book. I mean, ahead of Carrie, Salem's Lot, Cujo, all of that, The Shining. Pet Sematary was the one that was like synonymous with like, oh, this is the scariest Stephen King book out there, because it was one that when King wrote it and when it came out, it was the one that King was going around telling people, I didn't even want to put this book out, because he didn't. I mean, he's talked about, there were points in when he was writing this novel, there were points where he was just like, I don't even know if I want this to ever come out. And there was actually a period of about 5 to 6 weeks, I think it was, where he just kind of put it away, just kind of put it in a drawer and forgot about it, and was just like, okay, I don't think I ever want to release this out into the wild. But I think the story is, by the time that King was at the end of his agreement with Doubleday Publishing, he had one more book that he had to do for them, and there's Pet Sematary, and I think his wife Tabitha kind of talked him into, no, you should put this out, you should do it. So by the time the Pet Sematary gets published, Stephen King's going around the horn saying like, oh, this is the book that I really didn't want to put out. Like it freaked me out too much. Like it made me uncomfortable. So of course that gets out there, and it's Stephen King. I mean, the Shining and Carrie and all these, not only great books but great movies at the time. You know, pop culture shit. And so the word starts going around, and the lore begins of like, oh, Pet Cemetery, Stephen King, the book's too scary for even Stephen King, So the book goes out. It's a huge success. It was his, like I said, it was for years Stephen's most popular and most successful book going into it, to the point that different studios were in a bidding war. I don't know if a bidding war would be the word for it, but they were all trying to outbid one another to option the rights for Pet Cemetery. I think even one studio at one point, I want to say, was it Warner Brothers? I can't remember which studio it was, but one of the studios offered Steven $1 million for the rights to Pet Cemetery to do the movie, and Steven turned him down and ended up going with the company that his buddy George was, you know, co-owner of, or whatever you want to call it, Laurel Entertainment. He ended up selling the rights for Pet Cemetery to Richard Rubenstein, George Romero, and Laurel Entertainment for the grand total of $10,000. Now, it did include profit sharing, like whatever money would be made off of the movie box office, and then all the stuff that goes along with that. Stephen would get a cut of that, but $10,000. Laurel now owns the rights to Pet Cemetery, and an agreement was made by Laurel and George, because at this point we're talking 83, 84. They get the rights to Pet Cemetery, and this was right around the time where George and Richard were kind of starting to part ways. They were kind of they were kind of wanting different things out of what the company was, and where they wanted to take the company, where they wanted to take their respective careers. George wanted to focus just being a filmmaker. I just want to make my movies. Richard was more on the business aspect of it in terms of acquisitions of other properties, doing other things, working with other filmmakers, going into television. So Laurel was already kind of splitting, and George's contract with Laurel was ending right around the time that they finished Day of the Dead, and I think they'd kind of agreed to go their own separate ways. And if you read Lee Carr's book, The Making of Day of the Dead, he kind of gets into that and kind of the hostility that was kind of growing there amongst those guys. Not so much at this point between George and Richard, more so with George and some of the, I hate to say it, but I mean, it felt like, from what I've read and some of the quotes that I've read and heard from around this time between George and people like Mike Gornick, I felt they were kind of not seeing eye to eye around this time. So the whole, that whole Pittsburgh crew was kind of starting to splinter off at this point. So, but even so, even if George let his contract run out, not renew with Laurel, and they agree to go their own separate ways, at this time, George did sign what they called, what's the technical term for it, or what did they call it? A memo of agreement in March of 1985, which there's actually, well, here's an actual image of the screenplay that Stephen King had written for, and this one you can find in that Raising the Dead book. This is from the Romero archive. This is an image of the actual storyboards that George had already started working on for Pet Cemetery, according, going by Stephen King's screenplay, because the agreement was Stephen King would write the screenplay, Laurel and Richard Rubenstein would produce, Romero would direct, and yeah, it's just I love George's little art here, because this is George's idea of a storyboard here. So the screenplay was already out there. This was Stephen King's screenplay adapted directly from the book, and then this you can find in the George A. Romero's Independent Cinema by Tom Fallows. This is the memo of agreement that was signed by Laurel and George in 1985. And we'll take a closer look at everything that this entailed here as we go along, so we can kind of get an idea of what power George would have had in the making of a Pet Cemetery, where his boundaries were. So I mean, it was an agreement. Like, no matter what, even if we go our own separate ways, George Romero will still direct Pet Cemetery, because the rights were still in the hands of Richard Rubenstein and Laurel Entertainment. But after Day of the Dead, after the poor box office reaction to Day of the Dead 1985, George would go off and do another start. What I would say, he went off and started monkeying around on a film called Monkey Shines, and ended up doing that for Charles Evans, I think was the producer of that, and Peter Grunwald. Which Monkey Shines was shot in '86, came out in '80. No, shot in '87, came out in '88, I believe. And so here's George with with the monkey. Boo is the monkey's real name. Boo. Ella in the movie, I believe, or the other way around. No, I can't remember. So yeah, George would go off after Day of the Dead while they were still trying to get funding to do Pet Sematary, because the idea was they were going to do Pet Sematary after Day of the Dead, but they were having trouble. Laurel was having trouble finding the funding to do Pet Sematary, believe it or not. So while that was going on, George agreed to go off and do Monkey Shines. And of course, we get to the point where I think it was during the filming of Monkey Shines, Laurel ends up optioning the film outright to Paramount Pictures, and so it doesn't become a Laurel Entertainment film anymore. It's now a Paramount film. So Paramount now has the rights to the film. They retained Richard Rubenstein as a producer. So Richard's name is on it, even though if you watch the film, it doesn't say Laurel Entertainment anywhere. It still has Richard Rubenstein listed as a producer. So it's now a Paramount picture. They're going to put a major budget behind it. I think the budget for Pet Sematary ended up being around $11.5 million, which at the time would have been like the biggest budget that George had ever seen. I think the budget for Creepshow was $7 million, and that's the biggest budget George had worked with up to that point. So $11.5 million was going to be the budget for Pet Sematary. Stephen King, of course, writing the screenplay. So I mean, the table was set. Unfortunately, and this is the part that everybody talks about, it's like, oh, what if? Unfortunately, at the end of shooting Monkey Shines, George ended up having to go back and do some reshoots, and had to go back and reshoot the ending because the studio Orion Pictures that was doing Monkey Shines demanded that he redo the ending and yada, yada, yada. Now, these reshoots, unfortunately, coincided with the beginning of the production, the pre-production and all that for Pet Sematary. And instead of Paramount Pictures saying, oh, well, we got to wait around for this George character, the zombie guy, we got to wait around for him. Instead of doing that, they decided to move on. And that's when they brought in Mary Lambert, and the rest is history, as they say. So George misses out on Pet Sematary. They bring in Mary Lambert as the new director. And like I said, Mary Lambert at this time was an interesting choice, because Mary Lambert was not a horror filmmaker at all. Like she mostly made her bones in the '80s directing music videos a lot, for some really big artists. I mean, she was one of the top music video directors out there. So picking Mary Lambert, I'm not sure. I haven't read anything or know anything about like what, persuaded them to pick Mary Lambert to direct this film. But they went with Mary Lambert. And like I said, I'm not here to take away anything that Lambert did on the film. I think she did a fantastic job. To this day, it's the main thing that she's kind of known for, because even after the movie came out and the success of the movie, outside of the sequel, Pet Sematary 2, she really didn't do a whole lot mainstream-wise in terms of feature films. But I think she does a fantastic job of translating what Stephen King had on the screenplay. So I'm not here to take anything away from her. She did a great job, and the final product shows that. Another interesting thing about this was in that agreement, it was agreed upon that Stephen King would have final say over everything above George, which I don't think there would have really been any butting heads there. Because I mean, George and Steve were friends. They'd worked together before. They had that working relationship. Of course, George had worked with Rubenstein, of course, in the past. I think they knew how to work together. But the thing about it is, it was in the contract that the film had to be shot in Maine. So it would have been the first film that George ever shot outside of Western Pennsylvania. So that would have been interesting. And I think that would have it felt like that was kind of the next logical step for George's career. Going from Day of the Dead, getting away from Laurel, and doing Monkey Shines, which was kind of George's first semi-major studio film for Orion Pictures, working with some, some name cast. Um, and I always remember reading, George saying after doing Creepshow, he kind of felt like he was at that point in his career where he felt comfortable working with stars, working with people like Leslie Nielsen and E.G. Marshall, and he doing Creepshow gave him that confidence to say, okay, I can direct big time actors. I can work with a studio like Warner Brothers. I can do this. So that kind of gave him that confidence to step into a role like Monkey Shines, where he's working with other, SAG actors, as they say, people like Jason McKay, Stanley Tucci, and Stephen Root. And I feel like the next logical step for George's career was doing a movie for a studio like Paramount Pictures with a budget like 11.5 million bucks, and working with a different crew outside of Pittsburgh, and working somewhere like Maine, doing a film like that. I feel like that would have made sense for George's career. And again, that's why I say it's one of George's biggest missed opportunities, because I feel like that was the next step, and the Monkey Shines reshoots kind of hindered that. So yeah, the movie comes out in 1989, number one at the box office. Major success, lukewarm reviews, but let me see if I can find. I had it written down here what the box office returns were, but it opened number one at the box office with a $12 million opening, which I think would have been, it was for sure more than what, because Creepshow to this, forever is George's only number one opening weekend at the box office, and I think that only did 7 or 8 million. I think it made its budget back in its opening weekend, I think. So it would have been George's biggest opening weekend of all time, with the biggest budget, and the movie would go on to rake in 57.5 million bucks worldwide. So it made its money back and then some. I mean, it was a hugely successful film for Paramount Pictures, and as it stood. Now, if George had directed it, if certain changes had been made, would it have been as big of a success? Who knows? Would the reviews have been better than what they were at the time? Who knows? That's the what if. And yeah, that brings us to, what if we did get George A. Romero's Pet Sematary? So now we can kind of bullshit a little bit. We can kind of play around with, you know, what if scenarios, what if. But there I set the table. I think I did a pretty good job of setting the table, kind of explaining how things worked out. And like I said, we're going to take a look at that memo of agreement that was signed, and kind of get an idea of what George's boundaries would have been if he had directed that film, because it's kind of interesting. Let me see here. Hit the comments real quick. Got a few comments. Steven saying, Robert, I understand your point entirely. However, a more off-kilter character like Deadman could have been a very interesting Romero. Oh, talking about the Marvel stuff. Yeah. Or something like, the Punisher or something I feel like George could have done. Sometimes it would have to have some kind of political or socio-political type of undertones I think George might have been interested in, but God, everybody's talking about Timothy Hutton. I'm not talking about Timothy Hutton. I'm not recasting anybody in Pet Sematary with Timothy Hutton. That's for damn sure. Grande, what's going on, brother? There's our future bracket champion. Grande says those damn bastards from Monkey Shines and that bad tacked on ending. Yeah, that's the thing too. So that would also kind of change history. If George had ended up doing Pet Sematary, that means that he wouldn't have had to go back and do those reshoots for Monkey Shines with the happy, uplifting ending where the quadriplegic magically walks again. They find the miracle. It's just like, no, like he's fucking crippled, man. Just let him be crippled. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't have to find the magic cure for it or whatever. But yeah, it would have changed. Monkey Shine's ending. Would people like Monkey Shine's a little more if it didn't have that ending? I don't think it really would have changed much if that ending would have been the original, ending. But who's to say? Since says they needed the special Monkey Shines reshoots of the cunnilingus scenes. Yeah, that's what it was. They didn't get enough close ups on that one, from what I hear. That's what the rumor was. Um, Granny said she did Halloween Town 2, which I love a bunch. Definitely the best of that franchise. She did a good job. Never seen any of the Halloween Town movies. I've heard about them. I hear people put them over a lot. Isn't there like a Disney Channel original movie or something? I remember seeing that back in the day, I think. I'm not watching the movie, but seeing it advertised back in the day because, when you're a kid, you used to watch Disney Channel a lot for this and that. But yeah, that's mostly what she ended up doing. After Pet Cemetery and after Pet Cemetery 2, she ended up, Mary Lambert, ended up doing mostly going back to doing a lot of music videos, doing a lot of television directing. Like she's had a very long and busy career. I'm not saying like she just disappeared off the face of the earth, but she didn't. It didn't. The success that she had with Pet Cemetery didn't really parlay itself into a major uh, feature film career as a director for one reason or another. I'm not sure why, because like I said, she did a great job with Pet Cemetery, and I think she's still applauded to this day for the job that she did on that film. And why that never went any farther, I don't know. And I think some of the things that she doesn't really get a lot of credit for, just doing a little research on her past and what she's kind of known for, is apparently like she has a real penchant for um, working with children, which is maybe one thing that would kind of separate her from George. George really didn't have a lot of experience working with children on set. So that would have been an interesting dynamic, I think. George working with, Miko and the little girl. What's her name? I got the cast written down here somewhere. What was that girl's name? Blaze? Blaze Bird Ellie Creed. So yeah, that would have been interesting. Working with the animal, like the cat and stuff. I mean, George was just coming off of doing Monkey Shine, so George was fresh off of a set where he had to do a lot of work with animals. So I think working with the animals he would have been fine with. But yeah, the children aspect, I think Mary Lambert really, and people said all throughout her career, like she what they call her, like the kid whisperer or something like that. Like she was really good at working on set with children. So that makes sense. Doing Halloween Town 2 makes total sense. There you go. Connecting those real quick. Since says Pascal didn't do a whole lot afterwards either. Yeah, yeah. Which I think he's great in the movie, but there is a Romero regular that I think may have worked a little better in that role. And we'll get to that here in just a second. Larry's in the house. What's going on, man? Saw Pet Cemetery in a theater when it came out. Loved it. It's a great movie. It is. It is. And like I said, I'm not doing this to put the film that we got down at all. It's a classic. To me, it stands the test of time. It works just fine the way it is. But I do think it is one of those moments in George's career that really could have changed, especially going into the 90s and knowing now what type of hell that George was about to walk into in terms of his career going through the 90s. I think if he would have done Pet Cemetery, it would have changed things drastically for him for the better, or maybe for the worse. Who knows? But it would have definitely changed things, that's for sure. Since I saw Creepshow opening weekend to a packed theater, it was awesome. Yeah, Creepshow is one of those. Like I said, I don't understand why they pulled the advertising on that the way that they did. I mean, it was, like I said, it opened number one. I mean, it's George Romero, Dawn of the Dead, Stephen King, who was hot as a $2 pistol at the time. It's like opening number one at the box office. Usually, that's when a studio kind of pushes it a little farther. It's like, oh, we're the number one movie at the box office. You got to come see this. You got to come see it. But they kind of didn't do that from all accounts. So I don't get it. Um. So yeah, I don't know. Granny says you did a great job setting the table. I just don't think George's version would have worked. It never would have been better than the film we got. Well, my argument to that, like I said, I don't know if it would have been better or worse, but it would have been better for George's career if he would have done Pet Cemetery. Because then you really okay. So let's get into it. You really got to ask yourself: does Mary Lambert, like I said, maybe working with the children I could give, but what did Mary Lambert bring to that film that George probably wouldn't have? Um, and one of the things that I think would be, I mean, the casting, because Ed hit me to the fact that Denise Crosby was pretty much cast in that film directly related to Mary Lambert's involvement in working with her on a Black Sabbath and Tony Iommi music video from a couple of years prior. So, and I think Denise Crosby's like that's one role that I wouldn't change if I were Romero. Like there are a couple of roles, obviously Fred Gwynn. Fred Gwynn is Judd. Like that. There's no that's Judd in the movie. I can't picture anybody else doing that role other than Fred Gwynn now. But there are a couple of roles that I would have recast, but Denise Crosby isn't one of them. So if we didn't have Mary Lambert, we wouldn't have gotten Denise Crosby in that role, I don't think. Now, is there somebody else in that in that Romero universe, in that stratosphere from around that time, that maybe could have stepped in and done as good of a job or maybe better? I don't know. I haven't really put a lot of thought into that one because I never connected those dots that Denise Crosby was kind of directly connected to her relationship with Mary Lambert. But I do think, and especially after reading the novel and getting a feel for what Stephen King put into that novel. Now, like I said, Stephen did the screenplay. He did the adaptation. So, I mean, not a lot would have changed content-wise or what, dialogue, story-wise. The movie that we got is pretty much what Stephen King wrote on the page, and that's pretty much what George would have shot. Now, what could George have added that would have pushed it over the top, maybe made it a little better? One thing that I was thinking while reading that book, because like I said, in the novel, it's really told from the perspective of Louis Creed, and you really get into the inner workings of his brain and his psyche, and the deterioration of a father who just lost their child, and the slow madness that he descends into that leads him to the burial ground to bring his son back. Amazing job. Stephen King does an amazing job of that, because I mean that it is almost kind of told from the perspective of Stephen King. Stephen King kind of going into himself, and it's like, imagine, because I mean he had a kid. I mean, like we talked about, it's kind of based on a true story of like an incident that almost happened to Stephen King, almost verbatim. The Pet Sematary thing was a thing that Stephen King talked about, like in a house that they were living in at the time. There was an actual pet cemetery in the back. Yeah, his son at the time almost was run over in the road on a busy highway like that. And that's one thing that I think George could have really tapped into. And I think George really could have sunk his teeth into at that time, because you got to remember, at this point in George's life, he was a father of a child, Tina Romero, who was right around that same age that the Ellie character would have been. And of course, his son Andrew would be born a couple of years later, but George was at that period in his life where he was a father. And it's something that I feel like he could have really sunk his teeth into and maybe brought out a little more, because Mary Lambert, I've read that she does have a child, but I think they were born after the fact. So maybe that's a perspective, like a father's perspective being brought into the director's chair of that film, maybe would have brought those emotions out a little more. I don't know. But that's one aspect that I was thinking of at the time. I was like, Tina would have been right around that same age of Ellie, and George was probably, especially being George Romero, and your daughter's growing up on the sets of, Day of the Dead and fucking Monkey Shines and shit. Like, I'm sure the topic of death had come up between those two at different points. Like, I'm sure those conversations or close to had been had between George and Tina at that point. And so George may have had a little more insight and a little more firsthand experience in some of those moments in the book that he could have translated to the screenplay for the film. So just on like a subconscious level, I think George may have been a better fit than Mary Lambert, just for that aspect alone. Because to me, like, that's the part of the book that I like more than the movie, is the fact that you get a little deeper into the psyche of Louis Creed than you do in the movie. In the movie, to me, and like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of Del Midkiff's fucking performance in that movie. To me, he's trying to convey intensity in like these blank stares throughout the movie, and it's so distracting to me, especially watching it again the other night, that to me it just looks like he's just kind of dull. Like I don't see that intensity in his eyes, but I do think there's an actor who could have really brought that role to life, which I'll talk about here in just a second. Um, but let's look at this. So this is the memo of agreement that was signed by Laurel Entertainment and George back when they agreed that George would sign on as director only to do Pet Sematary back in 1985. And we'll read through this and we'll get an idea of exactly what George's role would have been in the filming of this movie. Like I said, he wouldn't be doing the screenplay. There are certain aspects that he wouldn't have final say over, but there's certain aspects that he would. And like I said, you can find this in, it was printed in this book here, George A. Romero's Independent Cinema by Tom Fallows. You can find it here and read all about it, folks. Read all about it. But I can't see what the hell it says at the top, but it's basically the subject of Pet Sematary. This is what they're agreeing upon, George and Laurel. Because like I said, George and Laurel were kind of splitting company at this point. But hey, commitments. Laurel commits to George A. Romero as director of the picture on work for hire basis. So they're basically hiring as, just work for hire. He has no other connections to the company, but he's hired as the director only. George A. Romero commits to direct the picture, barring illness or uninsurability of Romero. Commitments provided for by this paragraph will expire on January 1986 unless pre-production commences on or before that date. Now, we know Pet Sematary didn't go into production until 88, but by the time 86 rolled around, George had already resigned or didn't renew his contract with Laurel, but they did end up signing another agreement after the fact, so it kind of renewed after this. So the agreement was still good. Financial fees greater of $375,000 or 50% of the first $750,000 received for George A. Romero / Richard Rubenstein / Stephen King services, and 15% over $750,000 to aggregate $500,000 ceiling. It's a lot of money mumbo jumbo there. Excluding any money paid to Steve King. Profit participation, 5% of profits as defined for Steve King, received by Laurel, excluding any money paid to Steve King. So there's a little financial information there. So basically just saying what George would make off of the back end there. So this is the interesting part. Creative matters. George A. Romero to have right to approve, but shall not unreasonably withhold approval of the following, provided, however, that the rights of I can't see what that word is. Approval must be exercised consistently with budget and scheduling requirements, and consistent with a running time for answer print of not more than, I think it's 120 minutes, and an MPAA rating not more restrictive than R. Approvals are additionally subject to any rights of completion, guarantor, and Stephen King's rights of approval. So basically, these are all the things that George has approval of, but can be vetoed by Steve King. So if George says, I want A, Steve can come in and say, no, I want B, so it's got to be B. Because, like I said, they're shooting in Maine, they're shooting Stephen King's script. But outside of that, George has final say on a number of different things here. And the list includes a set designer and sets, B, costume design and costumes, first assistant director and staff, composer and or music. So we heard a little DeWolf in there, I'm sure. Sound recordist, post-production and sound personnel, editor, special effects, lighting director, director of photography, and final cut. If he desires, George Romero may supervise post-production, but without additional compensation. So that's interesting. Let's tackle this. Now, I think for the most part, like I said, this would not have been shot in Pittsburgh. This would have been the first film that George would have shot outside of Pittsburgh in Maine. So I think a lot, and it's like I said, it's $11.5 million budget. It's a Paramount Pictures production. So I think a lot of the cast and crew would have been, there wouldn't have been a whole lot of George regulars that he would have brought with him from the Pittsburgh scene, I don't think. Because like I said, a lot of the guys like him and Gornick had kind of split ways at this point. But I do think there are certain people like Barbara Anderson, Cletus Anderson, I think probably would have worked on this with George, because they worked with George on everything up to The Dark Half. Probably would have gotten Pat Booba as his editor, of course. The one thing that stands out here that I think that would have been really interesting, because I think it would have happened, would be Tom Savini. doing the effects for Pet Sematary. I think that could have taken it to a different level. Like the effects in the movie we got are not bad. I'm not saying that at all. But with a budget like $11.5 million, because if you watch Pet Sematary, you're like, yeah, where did a lot of that money go? You know, and we've always talked about how George was really, really special at getting every dollar on the screen and finding a way to stretch a buck. And so, could you imagine some of the stuff that Tom could have done with that big of a budget? Like that may have been the biggest budget Tom had to work with effects wise up to that point. Because if Tom was on set doing that, there's no telling, who else he would have brought with him as assistants and stuff like that. Would Nicotero and Berger and those guys have come with him? You don't know, but I do think that that's one thing that George could have brought to the table for a Pet Sematary movie directed by him, is he would have gotten effects by Tom Savini, because Savini was still doing effects at the time. Like he'd just come off of working on Monkey Shines with George. He would go on to do Two Evil Eyes with George and Dario. And this is of course right before he did Night 90. So I think that would have been really, really interesting. And the other one that I've thought about music wise, and you guys, we talked about that the music for Pet Sematary is pretty good as it is. Like I don't think it needed to be changed, but I would have kind of been interested to see. And I don't think there was much of a connection there at the time, so I doubt it would have happened. But taking into account, like to me, if George does Pet Sematary, he doesn't do the dark half a couple of years later. Like I feel like the dark half was kind of like Steve saying, "Well, I still want to work with George on something, so I have this other thing that I want to do with George. We can do the dark half. We didn't get to do Pet Sematary, but we can do the dark half." But if George does Pet Sematary, I don't think George does the dark half. So with that in mind, I think it would have been interesting if Christopher Young, if you would have brought Christopher Young to do the score for Pet Sematary, which Young had just come off of doing Hellraiser a year or two before, and the score for Hellraiser is fantastic. So I think that would have been kind of an interesting alternative to what we got. Like if they still used the same guy that did the same score for Pet Sematary that we got, I think it would work perfectly fine. But Young's score for the Dark Half has really kind of grown on me over time. Like it's really it's very Danny Elfman esque in a lot of ways, in my opinion. So that would have been an interesting possible alternative, but I don't think it would have been as obvious as your Barbara and Cletus Andersons or your Pat Boobas or your Tom Savini's for that point. But the one thing that's not listed on here that's kind of interesting that George doesn't have final say over is casting. So how much of the cast that we got in Pet Sematary would have been the same cast that George would have used? Like I said, we probably wouldn't have gotten Denise Crosby because of her connection to Mary Lambert. It's hard to imagine anybody other than Fred Gwynn as Judd, though. It's just, yeah, Sam, you got to stay out of that road. Watch the road now. All that road. It's iconic at this point. It's almost as iconic to me especially to this generation. Like Fred Gwynn is almost as iconic as Judd in that movie as he is Herman Munster, almost, because everybody knows that fucking Maine accent that he has in that movie, and he's so good in that movie too, man. He's so good. He's definitely the best part of that movie acting wise, in my opinion. So yeah, I think if it were up to me, if we could kind of just bridge it a little bit here and play with the idea a little bit, I would have kept Fred Gwynn as Judd Crandall. I would have kept Denise Crosby if that was a possibility, but without Mary Lambert, I don't know if that happened. So I don't know if any of you guys in the chat have any other ideas about who could have played that role of Rachel Creed. But Denise Crosby's fine in my opinion. Miko Hughes as the little kid as Gage is just perfect. Like he's so damn cute, but also at the end, he's kind of terrifying, but he's also still kind of cute. So it kind of works, especially at the end when he's just like, "That's not fair, not fair," And the little girl, Blaze Birdahl does a fine job too. I don't see anybody else replacing her. But I did have some recommendations for some different, some other casting options that we could have used here. Let's look at the comments here real quick. Let me see what the chat's saying before I go into those. I feel like I'm pissing people off tonight. I don't know. It's like, what are you crazy? Pet Cemetery is perfect. Like I said, I'm not downing the movie that we got. I think the movie we got is a fantastic Stephen King adaptation for sure. But that's a good point too. VHS sales and rentals might not have been included in those figures, plus Laserdisc TV rights. Yeah, I don't think they are. I think that was strictly the $57.5 million was just worldwide overall box office. So, Stesio, I thought about Ed Harris, maybe replacing Dale Midkiff and Denise Crosby with Ed Harris and Amy Madigan, which would make sense in a Romero view. But I don't. I don't know if that would work. I couldn't see Amy Madigan in that role. Just not saying she's a bad actress or anything, because she just won the Academy Award. Who the fuck am I to say anything other than that? Her second one, I think, or maybe she was nominated for one back in the day, but can't remember. But she's a great actress. Don't get me wrong. But that did cross my mind. And Galen was out of acting at this time, so I don't think she would have done it. And Dwayne Jones died in 1988, so I don't think they could have got him. But that is, I mean, what do you guys think? If they did end up having to replace Fred Gwynn and bring in somebody else to do Judd Crandall, who could have fit that role? Like the one that kind of snuck into my mind as a possible maybe could have pulled it off, because I think he's a really good unknown actor, is Bingo O'Malley. I think Bingo O'Malley might have pulled that off somewhat, but again, being shot outside of Pittsburgh in Maine, I don't know if, especially with a budget like that, and especially with a studio like Paramount Pictures behind it, I don't know if they would have said, "Oh yeah, let's Bingo O'Malley, local Pittsburgh actor. Let's rest our hopes and dreams of this movie on him." Even though I think he could have pulled it off, but Grande says, I sort of think the source material was too dark for George. Despite what you mentioned about him writing Clay, I just don't think he ever went as dark as Pet Sematary needed to go. Possibly. Possibly. I mean, George was always kind of known for having that sense of humor to him, but yeah, I don't know. I think he could have done it. I think it was, like I said, it just kind of felt like Pet Sematary would have been that perfect next step. Working with Richard again, with the big budget for a studio outside of Pittsburgh. I mean, he already had that working relationship with Richard and Steve. And like I said, the screenplay, wouldn't have changed a whole lot. And bringing Savini on along with him. And like I said, I just think like George wasn't a paraplegic with a pet monkey. So it's like he needed something he could sink his teeth into from a personal standpoint. I think being a father of a child at that age, as the kid in the movie, and kind of, I don't know. I think he could have done it. I think he could have made that work, especially with, I think if he was writing the screenplay for it, maybe not so much, but the fact that Steven was pretty much on set working hand in hand for a lot of that too, and it was his screenplay, I think there would have been some really good collaboration there, especially with, Steven's history with the book and his thoughts and feelings on the book. I don't know. I think it could have worked. Steven says, assuming the box office would have been the same or better, I absolutely agree that would have been his next step. But I suppose the next question is, could George have handled that much change? Like in terms of like budget and stuff? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, he had worked with about $7 million on Creepshow and worked with some name actors and worked within the studio. And yeah, I've thought about that too. Like George was definitely more of an indie rebel. So I don't know how well he would have worked. But like I said, it wasn't like he was answering directly to a producer that he didn't know, or was working with a screenplay that somebody wrote that they were on just completely different points of. I mean, he was working with people that he'd worked with before. His producer would have been Richard Rubenstein, which Ralph Singleton, I think, was the Paramount producer that worked on set on, but I think, I don't know. It's just guessing. Maybe he wouldn't have had any issues with him, but I think working hand in hand with Stephen King and having that comfort and just trust in Steven and his vision, and Steven having that trust in George. I think it would. I think it would. They would. I don't know. I think it would have worked. Would Paramount have kept him in horror or tried to move him on to a different type of film? Would they have tried to push him into a crappy project because of their name value? Well, that's a good point too. And then, of course, when I was saying a minute ago, when they decided to go with Mary Lambert and remove George from the project, you got to wonder at this time too: was Paramount really? Which I think I'll read. I'll actually read this here. I think it was put pretty well in this book. Oh, shit, I just lost it. The Tom Fallows book I'm mentioning here, where they were talking to Gornick about it, because Gornick was still a member of Laurel at the time. Let me see if I can find it. Fucking lost it. I moved the damn card and it disappears. But anyway, fuck it. Basically, what Gornick was saying was he didn't feel like Paramount really wanted George to be the director, because you got to think George was coming off of the failure of Day of the Dead. It was perceived at the time that Creepshow wasn't as big of a success as it should have been, whether that was George's fault or not. Night Riders wasn't a success. Monkey Shines wasn't a huge success either. So George was kind of, not a hot name at the time, really. So the idea of like maybe Paramount was kind of pushing for somebody else, and the fact that George wouldn't be able to make it on time to start the production when Paramount wanted, like, was it easy for them? Were they kind of pushing for it anyways? Like, oh well, he's not gonna make it, so we got to find somebody else. Like, I don't feel like they were really, as Gornick put it in the book. I remember the quote is, Gornick said, I don't feel like Paramount really lost much sleep by not having George as the director of this film. So take that what you will. I don't know how true or how realistic that is, but I mean, you got to think at the time. I mean, yeah, George was coming off of a slew of disappointments, box office disappointments. He was at that time just the guy that got lucky a couple of times, with Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. And outside of that, nothing else he did was, but not talking artistically or popularity within the horror community as much as just what studios look at, which is box office returns. He was not a hot director, which Carpenter wasn't at this time either. It was just they weren't the guy that studios were just tripping over themselves to get to at that time. So that's another aspect of it too. I mean, was Paramount pushing for a different director at the time, and this was their opportunity to say, "Oh, well, George's not going to make it, so we got somebody else waiting in the wings." So I don't know. Michelle says, I missed the last half hour because some dude fell off a tractor, apparently, and he had Mr. T's starter kit worth necklaces on. I had to remove. The more you tell me about Canada, the more I just feel like we're just not that different, you and I. We're just not. That just sounds like some shit straight out of Kentucky, man. That sounds like straight out of Kentucky. Ed says if he did pet, he and Peter Grunwald might not have kept a working relationship. So one way to look at that is we might not get Land of the Dead. That's an interesting. I mean, yeah, Grunwald worked with them on Monkey Shines, and if he'd have done Pet Sematary, my thing is, I don't feel like George would have done anything to detract from the success that Pet Sematary had at the time, because most of the success that Pet Sematary had, I would say it was 60-40, 70-30, the movie as opposed to the hype. Because when the movie was coming out, I mean, this is the one that Stephen King has even said it's too scary for him. It's like, and it was his most successful novel at the time. I mean, the table was set for that movie to be a success no matter what happened with it. So it was set up for George to step in, and kind of in the same way that Night of the Living Dead slingshot his career into the 70s and kind of kept some momentum going. Whether he had some failures or what, kept him going until he hit Dawn of the Dead. And Dawn of the Dead shot him forward into the 80s. This is the movie, to me, in my opinion, that I truly feel like if George had done Pet Sematary, this would have shot him off into the 90s. And the 90s for George Romero would be a completely different story. In my opinion, we wouldn't have gotten, for one, we wouldn't have gotten Two Evil Eyes. I think the Night remake was probably going to happen either way, but I don't think he would have done Two Evil Eyes, because you're the director, you're a name director still. You know, whether the studios wanted you or not, you're still a name that you can put on a poster and sell a movie. You're the guy that did Dawn of the Dead. You're the guy that did Night of the Living Dead. So you're a name director still. The movie you just did with Stephen King just smashed at the box office. Opening weekend, #1, 57 million worldwide, not including, as you point out, not including VHS and home video sales, rentals. So that's going to open up a world of opportunities for George going forward. I don't think he would do the dark half. I thought about would they have tried, because Paramount ended up picking up Tales from the Dark Side the movie after that. Would they have wanted George to do Tales from the Dark Side the movie, and we wouldn't have gotten John Harrison as the director? That's a possibility. But I do think that it would have opened the door for George to do other films outside of horror. It would have given him a little bit of leverage to say, hey, I kind of want to do this. And all the shit that George was working on at the time, by the time, like I mentioned it earlier, in terms of the Resident Evil stuff, I don't think we would have gotten the Resident Evil stuff with George. Because George, at that point, when they did the Biohazard 2 commercial, George was available. And George was, that was that period where George was just writing script after script and not getting anything done, not getting anything made. He was making a shit ton of money doing it, but he wasn't getting anything made. So he was available to shoot that commercial for the Japanese commercial for Biohazard 2. And that's what led him to, write the screenplay for Resident Evil. And when the movie got picked up and, they were bantering around what director we're going to get, like George was kind of front of the line. We wouldn't have gotten any of that, I don't think. Now, the big question is, if George had the success that he had with Pet Sematary, the big box office returns. I mean, George is kind of a hot name again. It's like, oh, it's the guy that did Pet Sematary. And he also did, you would look at George's career. I mean, it would be kind of the same thing, the same way that I look at Wes Craven and Wes Craven's career. Wes Craven starts off his career with Last House on the Left, and it becomes like this cult classic horror film, whatever you want to call it. He kind of becomes a name off that. He does The Hills Have Eyes, and then he does a few things, Swamp Thing, and he has a couple other movies that weren't quite a success. And then all of a sudden he hits Nightmare on Elm Street, and that, shifts his career into a different trajectory. And then there's a lot of stuff in between Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream, some good, some bad. In my opinion, mostly bad. There weren't a whole lot of smash box office successes there for Craven until he does Scream, and then all of a sudden, oh, Wes Craven's a hot name again, and he's doing Scream 2 and Scream 3 and all those Red Eye and all that other shit he did in the 2000s. All you need is like one hit per decade, and it'll carry you for another 10 years, is what it feels like. And I think Pet Sematary would have been that film for George, because then you look at his filmography differently. You say, oh, it's the guy that did not only invented the zombie genre with Night of the Living Dead, but reinvented it and started the 80s slasher or splatter craze with Dawn of the Dead, and the zombie craze in the 80s with Dawn of the Dead. So you got Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Creepshow, and then, oh shit, he also did Pet Sematary, one of the biggest horror films of the late 80s. So then by the time the 90s roll around, does George have the cachet? And I'm going on a long time here, guys. Sorry. Does George have the cachet at that point to do his fourth Living Dead film, Dead Reckoning, or whatever it was going to be called at the time? By the time, like let's say 94, 95. Does he have the ability to do that Dead film that he originally wanted to do? He always talked about doing one per decade. I don't know, because the zombie genre wasn't killing it in the 90s at all. So I don't know if we would have gotten that or not, but I think it would have been much more likely that we would have gotten something like Land of the Dead 10 years earlier if he would have done Pet Sematary. Now, would he have done Pet Sematary 2? I don't think so. I think that would have probably been, because Stephen King had nothing to do with Pet Sematary 2, so I don't think George would have had anything to do with Pet Sematary 2. And George was always one that was like, I don't really want to go back and do the same thing over and over again. So I think that would have gone to somebody else. So I couldn't see him doing Pet Sematary 2. But the other shit that he could have done in the 90s, who's to say? Who knows? But anyway, there's a long-winded what if. But that's a good point, though, man. Peter Grunwald definitely was kind of the guy that kind of helped revive George's career in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's for sure. Yeah. As you can tell by the last 15, 20 minutes of my coherent, incoherent rambling, however you interpreted what I just said, there's so many possibilities. Who knows what could have happened? That's for sure. Since as Denise Crosby left Star Trek Next Generation to do movies like Pet Sematary and had mixed success. Yes, Denise Crosby didn't do a whole lot mainstream wise after that. She did a lot of TV, done a lot of TV over the years. But yeah, Pet Sematary is kind of like the main feature film that she's kind of known for. I feel like. Steven says back in the day, music video directors were thought to be the next big thing. David Fincher is probably best known in the group. Yeah, I mean that was kind of the same thing in the 2000s too, when you had guys like fucking Mick G and what's the guy that did the Texas Chainsaw remake? Wasn't he like mostly known for his music videos? But the funny thing about that is like people always say like George kind of started that in the his working commercials and industrial films and stuff. His cutting style and stuff was very much music video-esque before music videos were a thing. So hey, it kind of fits in there. Yeah, there you go. Fincher, Spike Jones, yeah. Grievous said it's weird despite only making 2 Evil Eyes in the dark half in the 90s, George made the most money of his career in that decade. That's right. We would have got more films from him, but do you think he makes as much money? I think he would have made a killing. I mean, you see there in that contract, he would have made 5% off the grosses of Pet Sematary. So just assuming that Pet Sematary is at least as successful as it was when it came out, the version that we got, he made a shit ton there. And who's to say? I mean, this could have been George's stepping stone into Hollywood. Like I said, it just felt like that's where his career was headed at the time, working with studios. I mean, he ended up moving to LA and doing all the script writing and stuff that during that time period. So yeah, I think I think he would have made, if not more, as much money as he did in the 90s, but I think he would have also been more I don't know, artistically satisfied than he was in the 90s. That was the biggest thing for George. He just hated not making movies. It was like the most depressing thing. Like when you hear George talk about it or read anything about it, it's just like George, he hated that time period because he just felt like, my time is up, nobody's letting me do anything anymore. So it would have been more gratifying for George artistically if he would have, and I think that's more important to him than the financial aspect of it, honestly. It says if Fred wasn't able, could have Ken Foray played the farmer next door type? Ooh, I don't think so. I can't. Yeah, no, I couldn't see Ken doing that. That'd be interesting, but yeah. It's just that accent, man. I can't picture anybody else doing that accent other than Fred Gwynn. Yeah, you gotta watch that ride now. Kurt Russell as Creed. Yeah, maybe. I'd watch Kurt Russell as anything. Since says the house we had over 14 years had its own pet cemetery in the backyard, cats, dogs, rabbits, etc. Well, I think everybody's buried a pet or two in the backyard. Sadly, it says being a Disney kid, Kurt Russell would have connected to Miko Hughes. That's true. Plus, Kurt had several sons. Yeah, it's not a bad choice. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I could see that. I think Kurt could have pulled that off if they could have got Kurt to do that. Grant, what's going on, brother? Good to have you, sir. Always good to see you. It says Tom Savini would blow in his pants if he got a chance to do effects on Herman Munster. Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, he'd have got to do fucking the yeah, cream in his pants. Grant, a cool pick for the music. Really like Christopher Young. Yeah, I think it would have worked because there's a lot of similarities to the score that we get in Pet Sematary and kind of the style that Christopher Young uses in stuff like The Dark Half and Hellraiser. Pino Donaggio, that wouldn't be a bad one. Pino would go on to do the score for Two Evil Eyes, which a couple of years after. So I could see that. But I wonder if Pino was more of a Argento guy than a Romero guy. I would assume that with that name, it's a very Italian name, so I just assume Pino Donaggio. Yeah, sometimes Dad is better. I don't know. Can't see Ken Forey doing that. It says Fred is the second best known for My Cousin Vinny. Yeah. I don't know, man. I'd say Herman Munster and then fucking Jed. Jed Crandall now. Car 54, where are you? So now we're having a discussion on Fred Gwynn's career. I'm here for that. Yeah, super famous for Herman Munster, of course. Rip Torn would have been great. There you go. I can't think of Rip Torn now without thinking of Freddy Got Fingered, sadly. Yeah, I knew you'd appreciate that one, Michelle. I do think Bingo could have pulled something off as like the the small town old man across the road. I think Bingo could have pulled that off. Bingo, of course, would go on to work with George at Two Evil Eyes a couple of years later, and it was a big acting name around Pittsburgh. But I don't know if that would have been a name that they really could have, because like I said, George doesn't have final say over casting, so I don't know if he could have really pulled the strings to make that happen with Paramount or not. But Steven says, if you had to replace Fred Gwynn and you stick with the Romero family, how about Richard Liberty? I thought about that, actually. Richard Liberty might not be a horrible choice for that, because he plays Dr. Frankenstein in Day of the Dead, so why not play the Herman Munster role in fucking Pet Sematary, right? That makes sense. There's some interesting choices. Since says Jeffrey Tambor or Elliot Gould could have replaced Gwen, but I prefer Gwen. Tambor would have been an interesting choice. Tom Towles would have been a great Judd. Man, I don't know, man. Tom, he doesn't have that homely, trustworthy feeling that Fred Gwynn brought to that role. Like, I think of Tom Towles, I think of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, or Harry in fucking Night 90. He's, I don't know, too intense. Larry says, if my memory serves me, Gornick did the scouting, location scouting for Pet Sematary. I think you're right. I think I remember hearing that as well. I'll have to look into that, because now that you say that does kind of ring a bell. That's true too, Robert. We may not have gotten Bruiser. That's for sure. I actually pretty sure we wouldn't have gotten Bruiser. What about some of those projects in the 90s that George worked on forever and ever? And The Mummy, maybe he would have gotten a chance to do The Mummy. Before I Wake was another one. I'm sure he would have gotten a chance to do another Stephen King story outside of The Dark Half. I don't think he would have done The Dark Half, but I think he would have been able to do another one of those Stephen King stories. Adaptations. Thinner might have been an interesting one. Because Thinner was a property that Rubenstein and Laurel had at the time, and of course, I don't think they were Laurel at that point, because I think they ended up having a merger with Spelling Entertainment. I think. I don't think Thinner is like the most beloved Stephen King adaptation out there, but it's one I could kind of see maybe Romero doing. I don't know. Fat Pig the Conqueror says, I love saying that name. Sad part is the Resident Evil movie we got was so dumb. I agree. I'm not the biggest fan of those movies. You guys probably know. Craven is my last name. That's right. Grant Craven. There you go. Which I don't know if you heard earlier, but I have the bracket challenge. You are currently in third place, sir, with 41 points, but which is good. Good for you, but I don't think anybody's going to be catching Grande unless some crazy shit happens over the next few days and some movies win that I'm not expecting to win, which I mean, it really could go either way on a lot of these. But yeah, I think Grande's going to have a $50 Vinegar Syndrome gift card headed his way here fairly soon. Ed says Richard said something like he offered George the money to do a fourth Dead film in the 90s and George turned it down. Interesting. I don't know if I don't remember ever hearing that. What's your source on that, sir? Where did you hear that? I'd like to check that out. I'm interested in hearing anything that Richard Rubenstein has to say about anything, honestly. He's so interesting to me, and he's such a mystery, such an enigma. Um, that's right, Steven. She was also in 48 Hours, Denise Crosby. That's right. Forget about that. Yep, 1982 came out a month after Creepshow. Looked great in it too. She still looked good in Pet Sematary, man. I think that role works really well for her. Like that's one I would not change. But I did have some here. A few roles in the film that I would have changed, and these would be my picks. If I were Romero and I could cast these roles differently, these would be my picks for these roles. And the first one I've mentioned earlier is Del Midkiff as Lewis Creed. He's not a bad actor. He doesn't do a horrible job. I don't think he's bad at it, but like I said, there's so many moments. For example, like this shot here, you can kind of see. I feel like there's just not enough intensity. There's not enough going on behind his eyes that translates to the screen. It just looks like he's just staring off into space to me. But there is an actor that George would end up working with that George was a big fan of because he had just seen him in a little film, which I just mentioned actually, that George would end up going on and working with in The Dark Half that I think would have made for a better Lewis Creed, especially if George ended up playing into more of the psychological aspect of a father losing a child and kind of going off the deep end. Tell me Michael Rooker would not make for a better Lewis Creed in Pet Sematary than Del May. You want to talk about intensity behind somebody's eyes? Look at it, and he's playing a good guy in fucking Dark Half here, but he looks like a complete psychopath. And he was just coming off of Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, or just coming off of, or just getting ready. I can't remember, right around that time when Henry came out, but it was right around this time. But if I were doing the casting for Pet Sematary, I would 100% cast Michael Rooker in the role of Lewis Creed. And like I said, George would go on a couple years later and work with Michael. Just look at those eyes, man. He's conveying everything right there in that image that Del Midkiff tries to convey throughout that entire movie. That just does not work for me. But Rooker would pull that off like a son of a bitch, let me tell you. So that would be my first, because Rooker, like I said, Rooker would go on and work with George in The Dark Half, and I'm assuming, like I'm saying, in my world, if George does Pet Sematary, The Dark Half doesn't end up happening, or it may end up happening, but George wouldn't be doing it. So I feel like Rooker would be a perfect choice to slide in there and add something a little extra to that role that, God love him, I just don't think Del Midkiff brings to the table. And that's just my humble opinion. Yeah. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. I mean, just look. I mean, they look very similar. They have a very similar look. Look at that. But just look at the difference of the intensity in the eyes. And Rooker can play a convincing lead protagonist. We see it in The Dark Half. We've seen it in several different. I mean, he has a charm and a likability to him, but boy, he can turn it on and play fucking crazy like nobody's business. And I think we all know that. It says Rooker might have been too intense. You got to remember that the father-in-law has to slug him. Well, in the book, which we're not going off the book, we're going off the screenplay, which I guess Stephen wrote it the other way. But in the book, because of the deterioration of Lewis Creed's psyche in the book, he ends up slugging the father-in-law first. So that's just the book. But yeah, that's a good point. I wouldn't start a fight with Rooker. I wouldn't. All right, Grande, who would you put in that role? Rooker's a great actor, but I can't see him in that role. Yeah, come on. I can literally see him in this role. Look at the difference of intensity in those eyes. This dude's just staring off thinking about lunch, the craft services. Rooker's being the good guy in this movie, and he looks like he's ready to snap at any moment. That dude's digging up his dead kid in a cemetery and reburying him in an Indian burial ground somewhere. That dude, that's what that dude's doing. But I respect it. I respect it. If anybody's opinion, I respect it. It's yours, Grande. Um, since there's Keith Wayne as the father playing King Morris, the scene gets more tense. There you go. There's the correct answer. I stand corrected. Keith Wayne as Lewis Creed. Bless him. Robert Mike, I think he should have been casting director. Hey. Of course, we're looking at this in the hindsight of, what is it? 40 years now, since almost going on 40 years. Jesus Christ, seriously? Yeah. I was born in 88. Holy shit, I'm close to 40 years old. So yeah, we're looking at this in the hindsight of like 40 years of in retrospect, but Steven says I actually don't have a problem with the pick. Didn't they have some issues on the dark half, however? I don't remember him having so many issues with George. I think the main issues on the dark half were between George and Timothy Hutton. I think the issues that Rooker had were with Timothy Hutton and Amy Madigan, actually. Just from what I remember hearing in some commentaries and interviews, I remember hearing that their acting styles just really didn't mesh. But I've never heard George say anything negative about Rooker. Which George, I remember saying at one point when they were casting the Dark Half, he originally wanted Rooker for the role of Thad Beaumont. But the studio, which some of you guys are saying in the chat, the studio didn't think that Rooker could play a convincing Thad Beaumont. Like they could see him as George Stark, but they didn't think that he could play a convincing Thad Beaumont. But George saw that in him, but it doesn't make any sense because they ended up casting him as the sheriff anyway. So it's like he ends up playing the good guy anyway. And in terms of performances, to me, like he's the best part of the dark half performance wise. So yeah, would you like a chocolate covered pretzel? Love that. Love them in Mallrats. I'll give you an out of the box choice, but he was younger than Viggo Mortensen. I can see Viggo. Viggo did Texas Chainsaw 3 a couple of years after, so he was still kind of an unknown name. Yeah, I could see that. I could see Viggo having that intensity to him, I think. Yeah. Oh, don't get me wrong. He plays a great villain, but I think you got to have the ability to kind of do both, and you got to be because to me the problem with Midkiff is like I don't feel like he's convincing enough as a guy that's gone over the edge, that has kind of snapped to the point where he would do something like dig up his dead child and bring him back from the dead, and. But I feel like Rooker could fucking turn that on easily. Bonnie says I have an early start tomorrow, so good night, everyone. Have a great week. Have a great week, Bonnie. Have a good morning. Gotta get up early. I feel you. I gotta get up early too, so probably won't go on too much longer tonight. But I did have a couple other things I wanted to bring up here. Yeah, that's right, Ed. He had done Young Guns too by that time. Yeah, that's true. Could have worked. Now another casting choice, and I think the guy that ends up playing this role, his name, what's his name? And I forget who mentioned it earlier, but never really went on to do anything other than the role of Victor Pascal. Brian Greenquist, I think was his name. I can't read my own handwriting here, but iconic character from Pet Sematary for sure. Great makeup. I mean, he plays kind of like the gory version of a guardian angel almost. It's kind of trying to help save this family and try to fix the situation. No, I think the guy that plays him is fine. This is one that I would not. My choice wouldn't be like, oh, we got to replace this guy with somebody better. But I think a guy that would have worked just as well. That, like I said, kind of ended up being somewhat of a Romero regular, who go on to work with George on a couple of films that I think would fit this role just as well, and kind of has that same charisma to him. And like I said, keeping in mind that the dark half doesn't happen, what about Robert Joy as Victor Pascal? What do you guys think? I see it in there. I see it in this guy. I think Robert Joy could have pulled it off because Robert Joy has that unique look to him already. Um, and George loved working with Robert Joy. Like George never had a bad thing to say about Robert Joy. Um, talking about the cast from the dark half, people would say, you know, this and that about Timothy Hutton or Michael Rooker or Amy Madigan. George would always say, "Oh, but man, working with Robert Joy was exactly that, a joy." Like he loved working with Robert Joy. So that would be one of those actors that I would love. I would hate to imagine a world where George didn't meet and didn't get to work with because, of course, he would go on and be maybe my favorite character in Land of the Dead. Like he's such a likable guy in Land of the Dead as well. And one of the first celebrities I ever met at a convention at that Texas Frightmare Weekend in 2008, and just the nicest, coolest, down to earth guy. So just to me, like this is me hoping like if we don't get the dark half, maybe we don't get Robert Joy working with George, but maybe we could replace the Victor Pascal character with Robert Joy. Well, just think of it. A little makeup. The brain hanging out over here. Robert Joy's got that quirky kind of delivery and feel to him. I think it could work. Yeah, you got it. You guessed it, Robert. Robert Joy. William Zabka from Karate Kid. That one, I don't hate that actually. I think that would be kind of an interesting choice for Victor Pascal. I could see it. I could see it. Pupil, what's going on, man? Or like Jack from American Werewolf. There you go. Good to see you. Granny says totally could see Robert doing that. He might have been a little old for it, but I think it would have done well. Yeah, that was kind of the one thing I was thinking of. He might have been a little too old for it at the time. I mean, he was still pretty young. I mean, he would have been 2 or 3 years younger when he was doing Pet Sematary than he was here, because this is a shot from the dark half. But I think it would have worked. I mean, he would have been in makeup anyway, and half of his head would have been falling out. So I think it could have worked. Pilato as Pascal. I don't know. I'm fucking dead, you morons. I think that was my impression of Eric the Midget, actually. I'm club fucking footage, asswipe. But yeah, I don't know. Pilato as Pascal, maybe. I'm down to see Pilato in anything. So, well, hold on. We got the return. We got the return. I got it. I got it back on. So, I think you guys just missed this.
You never know.
Money, money, money.
Chat. Thank you very much, Pupil. $3 super chat. Thanks for burning the midnight oils with us. That's what I do, man. That's what I do. Appreciate that, my man. I really do. Yeah, I kind of had super chats turned off for a while there, but I figure, what the hell, why not? I appreciate it, you guys. Anytime you guys send a super chat, it means a lot to me. I appreciate it. I don't want any of you guys ever feel like you have to, but it does help out. It does help out a little bit. So much appreciated. Thank you very much, people. I'm here burning the midnight oils all the time. So that's just what we do here. Thanks again, man. I appreciate that. Granny said, imagine instead of King as the priest in it, Romero played the priest like in Martin. That would have been interesting. There's a casting rechoice. I think at this point, though, George was kind of out of. George was like, I'm staying behind the camera now, because he didn't really do a whole lot of cameo appearance. Like he ended up doing, the cameo in Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that around this time. Um, but yeah, I don't care what Steve says. In hindsight, Steve loves being in front of that camera. You knew he had to pop in somewhere with his cameo, especially during this time period. He was always popping in random movies and shit, or his movie. I mean, even like Creepshow 2. He's the truck driver. Steven says Midnight Heat, gang related, and the Ali movie with Will Smith are his other standouts. Oh, there you go, Robert Joy. I didn't know he was in the Ali movie with Will Smith. That's cool. But yeah, great actor. Such a cool guy too. Romero loved working with Robert Joy. It says, "Is this the cemetery? Yeah, is this the cemetery that's supposed to knock our socks off?" Exactly. Can you imagine that?
Is
There
this
you
the
go.
shit that's supposed to knock our socks off?
There you go. There's the real Victor Pascal. Um, and then I had one other. What was my other idea for a casting rechoice here? Did I have one? Maybe not. I don't know. Oh, I did. One we haven't talked about a whole lot tonight. And I forget about this one because it's so perfect as it is, but using it with the Romero lens, I think this would have worked pretty well. If he would have went this direction. But what about old Zelda? Zelda Goldman here. Maybe still to this day, maybe the most terrifying aspect of Pet Cemetery, more so than anything else, is the fucking shit with Zelda. And of course, the character Zelda is supposed to be a teenage girl, but it's played by a man. So it's not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it is played by what's his name? I had it written down here somewhere, but it's played Andrew Hubestek. I don't know much about the actor, um, but a heavy makeup role, very physical role in terms of the way that the body's contorted and all that. But if George was making this movie, I could see Patty Tallman pulling this off around this time. This has been a couple of years before 1990. And yeah, maybe should be a little old to play a teenage version of Zelda in this movie, but as a stunt woman and as a actress who was used to working in makeups a lot at the time, which of course she had done. She was the witch in the Trick or Treat episode and Tales from the Dark Side. She plays the she bitch from Army of Darkness. She was used to playing physical roles in heavy makeup. And to me, if a guy can play the role of a a physically ill teenage girl, fuck it. So can Patricia Tallman. Why not? So that's the other one. That's the one I wouldn't like if it were up to me. Like I think it works fine the way it is. It's obviously still memorable and still effective to this day. But like I said, if it was a George crew and George had a say in it, I could see him reaching out to somebody like Patricia Tallman to put on the makeup, you know, get in the distorted physical performance of it, and I think she could pull it off. So that's the other one. Like I said, that's the one I could take or leave. But if I could see it happening, I could see Patricia Tallman pulling that off. Um, yeah, Fat Pig. Like it's still the one that, especially the scene where this shot was taken, because she's supposed to. Because in the book, she's supposed to be the size of Gage, and of course Rachel looking at Gage, but seeing her sister. But in the movie, like she's just like all crouched down and shit, and she comes running up and does the thing, like that's the shit nightmares are made out of for sure. Um, but like I said, it works perfectly fine the way it is. But if anybody had any changes to make, um, casting wise, there, I think Patty Tallman could make it work. Um, okay, since that the sister was not convincing in any way, even the makeup. Interesting. I don't know. I think it works pretty well, but I appreciate that perspective. Like I don't hear that a lot. Most people are pretty quick to put that aspect over. But think of it this way: in George's film, it would be Savini doing the makeup and Patricia Tallman doing the performance. So maybe see, there you go. Maybe that would be an aspect that Synth would like more of a Romero version of Pet Sematary. Because I could see it. I could see it. And with Tallman being a stunt woman, she'd have probably found a way to get booted out of a window or something at some point in the movie because that's what Patty Tallman does. It says Gary Clark should have been Zelda. But seriously, Patty gets my vote. I would have loved to have seen Gary and more work with George more. That would have been cool. Robert, another great pick, Mike. Thank you. I think that would work. Has the shock approach, but just looks bad. Oh yeah, I mean it's, but like I said, maybe that's the aspect where Savini's makeup expertise would come in and improve the film a little more, or maybe take this into account too. I always feel like Texas Chainsaw 2 was kind of hindered by Savini's effects because it's a little too movie-ish. But I guess for something like Pet Sematary, it wouldn't be a big deal. But for Texas Chainsaw, for me, like I just always, I don't know, it's hard to beat Bob Burns for me when it comes to Texas Chainsaw. It's just so realistic. But yeah. So yeah, Patty Tallman is Zelda. I think outside of that, though, I think casting wise, Miko Hughes is just iconic. I can't imagine Pet Sematary without Miko or Fred Gwynn. Those are the two big ones. Yeah. I don't remember if I have any more slides on this or not. Oh yeah, there we go. There's Savini. I had a slide for Savini. So this was Savini right around that time. I think this is a makeup that he did for Two Evil Eyes. I don't remember why I threw this in there. I think I was just saying, oh, imagine if Savini was doing the effects. There you go. And yeah, there's a great image from, I think this was from 1998, George and Stephen King, right around this time. And I just find it interesting Stephen's wearing a Monkey Shines hat in this picture too. But yeah, it's just when it comes to, like I said, the Pet Sematary, when it comes to George's career, I really think that movie was the biggest missed opportunity of George's career. I think it would have been George's biggest hit at the box office to date, because I think a lot of the success of that film was already baked in, just because of the hype surrounding the book and the success of the book and the hype. Stephen King going around on different shows and stuff talking about, this is the one that's like too scary for even me. I didn't even want to release this fucking book, but the hype was there already for it. And I think adding George to it, I can't see how that would detract from the hype. It would just be another recognizable name that they could bank on. And George bringing Savini into the mix, and again, another upgrade, another bankable name that they could use right around this time. And like I said, I think it would have just changed George's career for the better, going into the 90s. Financially, I mean, just work-wise for the better. I don't know what we would have gotten after that in the 90s. Would Paramount have reached out to George to do Tales from the Dark Side, the movie? Would they have reached out to George for other projects that they were working on at the time? Could George have gotten more money to do some of the stuff that he was wanting to do at the time? Because for years he was working on stuff like Before I Wake. I'm sure that he and Steve, because I mean, he and Steve stayed friends. I mean, until George died. I mean, George would always talk about his love of Steve and his work, and then he was always attached to various King properties, whether it was, from a Buick 8, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. They were always connected. And, after The Dark Half, which Steve was not a fan of The Dark Half, because it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't his screenplay. But if George had done something and had success working with Steve, adapting Stephen King's screenplay, I think we would have gotten more George and Stephen King collaborations into the 90s. And who's to say maybe George would have eventually done one of the television miniseries? Who's to say maybe he would have ended up doing The Stand? If he would have hit big with Pet Sematary and The Stand comes along and they say, okay, George, here's a shitload of money. You can do this. We got 4 to 5 hours to play with. You can make your fucking magnum opus with The Stand, this project that we've been working on together for all these years. Maybe George would have said, hey, what the hell, let's do it. I don't know. We'll never know. Unfortunately, George missed out on this opportunity. He ended up, 1990 was a fairly busy year for George. I mean, he had done the screenplay for Night 90. He had worked with Dario on Two Evil Eyes. He had he'd written the screenplay of The Cat from Hell that was used in the Tales from the Dark Side the movie. So I mean, he was attached and kind of working. The train was still rolling in 1990. Then the dark half rolls around. Orion Pictures goes bankrupt. They shelved that movie for a couple of years, and it just was not the success that it probably should have or could have been. If it had come out in 1991 when it was originally supposed to, as opposed to 1993. And then the failure of that just kind of snowballed into the 7 or 8 years of just development hell that George would be stuck in from that point on, whether it was, trying to get The Mummy made or Before I Wake or the Resident Evil screenplay or trying to get money for his next Dead film. Like, it was just, the 90s were not a good decade for George. It's a decade that George looks back on, like we said earlier, it's the decade where George made the most money that he ever did in his entire career. But artistically unfulfilling would be, not a strong enough way to put how George felt about that decade. And when you talk to Christine or ask Christine about that time period too, now, like, Christine will tell you, like, that was a really, really hard time, not just for George, but for her as well and their family. And because George really, just from what I've heard, what I've kind of gathered, like, George really was, not the happiest person in that time period because he felt like his career was over. He felt like, it's never going to happen again. Like, maybe I'll never make another movie again. But if he had done Pet Sematary, I think the success of that movie, like I said, the same way it worked with Wes Craven, going from, getting on the map with Last House on the Left, Nightmare on Elm Street, shoots him into the 80s, Scream resurrects him in the 90s. George needed that movie to to keep the ball rolling for him going into the 90s, and he just didn't have that. And then luckily in the 2000s, the zombie genre kind of resurrects itself, and we get the Dawn remake and Shaun of the Dead, and that kind of, those two films, the success of those two films kind of leads directly to George's resurrection and getting the money to do Land of the Dead. And George kind of becoming a pop culture guy, kind of becoming, he kind of was in the 2000s. Like, he was in cartoons. He was kind of everywhere. He was in Call of Duty. Like, I remember my cousin at the time who was playing Call of Duty and was like into playing games and stuff a lot. He was, I don't know, 8, 9 years old probably, but I remember him coming up to me and he was like, "Oh, you like George Romero, don't you?" I was like, "Yeah, how do you know who George Romero is?" He was like, "Oh, he's in Call of Duty. He's the main villain in Call of Duty. You can't kill George Romero." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, you can't kill George Romero." That's my motto. You can't kill George Romero. But yeah, I just remember he just became just kind of a pop culture icon in the 90s, the zombie guy. But yeah, so I don't know. I think Pet Sematary was his biggest missed opportunity. Would it have been better or worse for his filmography if he would have done it? Who's to say? But yeah, I just thought this was a really cool photo to end the. Thank you for coming to my dead talk, and this is the last slide for my PowerPoint presentation. But yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Stephen, obvious choice, a beta male / female role for John Amplis. His experience in Martin makes him perfect for that role. Interesting. Yeah, John was a very physical actor. His physical, I always felt like John Amplis's physical performance was always a step above his vocal or emotional performances at times, which I think it works. He works perfectly for Martin because Martin is very quiet, not a lot of dialogue, but he tells the story. He portrays the character through his movements, and same for Whiteface and Night Riders. He's the mime in Night Riders. I think he's magnificent in that. Interesting take though. That'd be interesting having a John Amplis who would have been what, close to 40 at the time, probably, at least almost, playing a deformed teenage girl. But hey, Amplis could pull it off. Amplis could have pulled it off. I love Texas Chainsaw 2, man. I do love that movie. But the one thing that always, I get it. It works for the type of movie that Chainsaw 2 is. But the one thing that I always kind of prefer, and there's certain effects in that movie that just don't work for me. Like I said, the effect where the guy gets the top of his head chainsawed off, and he's in the car, and you see the back, and his little hands are going like this, and you see the fake head spurting blood. I'm just like, it just doesn't look good. Why didn't they just cut that out? We didn't need that. But yeah, I like Texas Chainsaw 2. But it's in terms of Savini's work though, and we talked about it when I did that stream a couple weeks ago with the Revival House guys. In terms of like Savini's effects, it's one of my least favorite Savini effects movies for sure. It says Miko has said that he has no memory of filming that. Well, yeah, he was what, 3, 4 at the time when they filmed that movie. So that makes I don't have very many memories of anything I did when I was 3 or 4. But yeah, I could see that. It's understandable for a 3 or 4-year-old for sure. Oh, really? That's cool. Fred Gwynn made the cover of Fangoria for Pet Sematary. That's cool. Yeah, Fred would I love that he got that role, and his career kind of had a resurgence for that role because he ended up passing away, what, 93 when Fred Gwynn ended up passing away. So he kind of had one last big role before. I'm sure he did other things in between. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure he did other things in between. But yeah, I don't think I knew that. That's pretty cool. It says, has Richard Rubenstein said anything about Pet over the years? Yeah, he's nothing about this situation with George or anything, not that I know of. Maybe there's something in print somewhere. I do remember when the movie came out, he actually kind of like people do on like fucking Twitter and shit now, like on social media. He actually would write in and respond to some of the bad reviews and kind of say, you completely missed the point of this movie. In the way that Rubenstein would. But I don't think he's. I mean, I've heard him talk about the movie some over the years. He was featured in one of the behind the scenes featurettes on the DVD. It's also on this Blu-ray as well. So you can see him on set there talking about the movie. But I've never really heard him talk too much about what happened there with Paramount and George and all that. So, but there may be something out there, maybe worth looking into. I'm not sure. God help us. John Russo's Pet Sematary. No thanks. I do have a weird love for Russo, but I don't think anybody was begging to see his version of Pet Sematary. Frankie, what's going on, brother? Good to see you, man. Glad you're able to hop in here. Oh man, Jesus Christ, going on almost 3 hours. I've been babbling about this shit for 3 hours. I don't think I missed anything. Like I said, I got all kinds of notes and shit here just from doing prep for this show. Did I miss anything prevalent that needs to be pointed out? I don't think so. I think we pretty much fucking covered it tonight, guys. I think we pretty much covered everything I wanted to cover, and I've made my case for George A. Romero's Pet Sematary. But good to see you, man. Hope you're doing well. Steven says it's good they released it when they did as well. If they had waited, it would have went against the really big summer movies. Yeah, the movie it opened in what, April of '89? Yeah. Probably, I don't know how it would have fared against Batman that summer, but you never know. I don't care who's directing this movie. It wasn't beating out. Yeah, there you go. Wouldn't beating out Batman. That's for sure. Pew Poll says after Dawn, I suppose Warner Brothers came to Romero to make Creepshow happen, but I'm guessing they probably wanted another zombie movie. Well, Warner Brothers had reached out to Romero. I covered this at the beginning of the stream. If you want to go back and check it out, but they came to Romero because they had the rights to Salem's Lot. So they came to Romero after Romero had done Martin, which was a movie about a vampire in a small town. And so they put Romero and Stephen King together because they wanted Romero to direct the film version of Salem's Lot. So that's where that Warner Brothers relationship kind of began. And then of course Warner Brothers was working with King on a lot of stuff. So they didn't finance Creepshow. They were the distributors of Creepshow. They may have put in a little money into the budget. I can't remember. But yeah, that's kind of how that UFDC had the rights to Romero's third zombie film, which would be Day of the Dead. So they already kind of had that under contract. So Warner didn't have any say in that. Good to see you, man. Stay safe out there, and pop a cap in a motherfucker if you have to. But do what you gotta do. Good to see you, man. I'll talk to you soon. Pupil says if Warner Brothers was willing to make Creepshow, they probably would have rather financed Day of the Dead. Yeah, like I said, the Day of the Dead had already been was already they already had a contract with United Film Distribution and the Hassanines. So, but God, could you imagine if Warner Brothers what kind of changes and restrictions they would have put on Day of the Dead if they were putting up the money for it? I don't know if I could see that happening. Steven says My Cousin Vinny was Fred's last big role. That's right, but Pet Sematary is usually always mentioned in the conversation. Yeah, I always just remember Fred Gwynn to me. I remember him for three things: Herman Munster, of course, Judd Crandall, and the fucking Howard Stern. They would always fuck with him somehow on Howard Stern. They'd have Stuttering John show up on the red carpet and ask him stupid fucking questions about Herman Munster just to piss him off, because Fred Gwynn was actually a pretty respected and well thought of actor. Like, he did a lot of stage work. Like, he was, he took himself very seriously as an actor, and kind of always hated the fact that most people only knew him as Herman Munster. So those are the three things that I remember most about Fred Gwynn. Like I said, he passed away in '93. I was 5 years old at the time, so I didn't really grow up with him. But yeah. Yeah, there you go. Warner Brothers, Day of the Slightly Dead. It's probably what it would have been. All right, guys. Almost 3 hours in. I got to get my ass up and go to work in the morning, but this has been fun. It's fun to play these games. Like I said, I haven't done one of these streams in a while. The what if streams, these are always fun to do because you can really let your imagination run wild and you can kind of go in all kinds of different directions. But yeah, Pet Sematary was a big one. It's been kind of coming up a lot here recently in different conversations and streams. And like I said, reading the book and revisiting the movie, I felt like it was a interesting topic to kind of tackle and kind of give my 2 cents on what if George Romero had directed Pet Sematary. So, but yeah, I'll be back next weekend. I think I'm going to have Mike Ankus on next weekend. We're going to be talking about the new film that he's got in the works with a whole slew of Romero regulars: Laurie Cardill, John Amplis, Mark Tierno, and our buddy Eric Walter is working on that film as well. So planning on having Mike on next weekend. I think we're going to do it on Easter night, next Sunday night. So once you find all the eggs and Easter Bunny comes and pays you a visit, stop in and hang out with me and Mike Ankus next weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about his films, working on being a zombie in Day of the Dead. I want to hear some stories from the set of Day of the Dead, because if you've ever seen Day of the Dead, so in Day of the Dead, when Tasso gets his head pulled off, the guy pulling the head off is Mike Ankus. So definitely going to talk to him about that, get to know him, and talk about what he's got coming. And so yeah, it should be a fun conversation. Looking forward to that one. So I'll hopefully see you guys next weekend for that. But until then, everybody make sure like the video, Subscribe, comment below if you're watching after the fact. Let me know what you think and how, what you think a George Romero's Pet Sematary would have been. Give me your theories and thoughts on the topic. But yeah, so check out shop.alfaromero.store too. Just put up a couple of new designs up there as well. I know recently everything was 40% off here recently, so check into that. That may still be going, but yeah, check it out anyway. Shop.alfaromero.store. Do it. Larry, good to see you, man. Have a good rest of the night. Ed, appreciate it, my man. Thanks for the heads up on some of that trivia before the show. So I didn't know that about the Denise Crosby thing. Kind of changed my outlook on it. Maybe she wouldn't have been a part of it without Mary Lambert. So appreciate that. Yeah, take me back. Good old days, Howard Stern. I don't know what the hell he's doing now, but yeah, miss the old Howard Stern, that's for sure. Fat Pig the Conqueror, thank you very much, man. I'll see you later. Have a good rest of your night, my man. Great stream, Alpha. Good night, one and all, says Steven. Thank you very much, man. Always good to see you. Always good to have you in here. Larry corrected. It's Greg Nicotero pulling the head off. Angus is right next to Greg on Greg's left. There you go. Either way, he's there. He's there while the head's being pulled off, one way or the other. But if you ask, I'll ask him about it. I'll bring it up. I'll be like, did you pull the fucking head off or not? But Nicotero would make a little more sense. I feel like that'd be something that Tom would trust Nicotero to do. So that does make sense. But I'll ask him about it for sure. Robert, always good to see you, my man. Thank you, sir. Have a great night. And I'll catch you guys next weekend. But until then, everybody stay safe, stay prepared, but always stay scared.